Chapter 136. When he walked out of the house, Lu Chen's expression did not change. There was no anger, and no frustration. It was as if what Jean Dan Friar had said to him did not affect him at all. He just looked up at the sky. The sun was high in the sky and the sky was blue with white clouds. It was a sunny day. He looked at it for a while and then walked towards the herb garden. Along the way there were people coming and going, some of whom were acquaintances. Some greeted him and some nodded at him. But Lu Chen seemed to have something on his mind. He was silent all the way as if he did not see anything. He walked all the way to the entrance of the herb garden. The mountain breeze blew, and the unique herbal fragrance of the herb garden wafted over. Lu Chen looked at the neat spiritual fields in front of him. He looked at them expressionlessly and then walked forward. But the direction he walked was not towards his spiritual field. Right at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Big brother Lu, why do you look so pale?" Lu Chen stopped and turned around. He saw Xian running over from behind. She looked at him worriedly and whispered, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Lu Chen looked down. After a while, he shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Xian still looked worried. "Brother Lu, do you want to go back and rest? I can help you apply for leave." Lu Chen was silent and then said, "You better not go to Uncle Lin Sheng's place. He won't listen to you." Exn was a little surprised. "Forget it, I'll go with you first. It's not good to talk on the road." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the people around him. Finally he looked at a place in the distance and then nodded. "Okay. What?" Beside Lu Chen's spirit field, the two of them sat side by side on the ridge of the field. Exn looked a little annoyed and said indignantly, "How can Uncle Master Lin be like this? He clearly knows that something went wrong with your cultivation and hurt your body, but he still punishes you like this. Isn't this bullying?" Compared to when he first came to the herb garden, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be a lot better. When he saw Xian's annoyed look, he even smiled and comforted Exn. "Forget it, it was my fault." Xian bit her lip. "That won't do. Brother Lu, you are just a servant disciple. You don't have much income in Kunlun Mountain. Don't you count on the spirit herbs as rewards? Why did Martial Uncle Lin just casually say it and you?" "Because he is Jean Dan Friar." Lu Chen smiled. Xian choked. For a moment she was speechless. She didn't know what to say. After a while she said gloomily, in any case, I just don't feel right." After a moment of silence, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said to Lu Chen, "Big brother Lu, why don't I secretly ask Martial Aunt Yen and have her speak on your behalf? Uncle Yen is very good to me. If I ask her, she will definitely agree." Lu Chen stared at her, a glimmer of light flashing in his eyes. Then he smiled and gently said, "No need. Your martial Uncle Yen is a well-known veteran gold core realm cultivator. That favor isn't light, so why waste it on such a trivial matter?" "But you, didn't I say it's okay?" Lu Chen smiled and patted the girl's head. "Why can't you remember what I said?" I told you not to hit my head." Xian rubbed her forehead. However, after hearing Lu Chen's words, she relaxed a bit. She took out a small bag from her pocket and handed it to Lu Chen. "For you, brother Lu." Lu Chen took it and looked at it. "What is this?" "My family's tea." Xian smiled. "Didn't I mention it to you last time? Although this isn't our family's most famous tea, Little Crane, it's still a top-grade tea. It's not worse than most of the tea in Kunwa City's shops." Lu Chen nodded. The hand holding the bag of tea slightly tightened. When he looked up, he saw the sunlight shining down on them. The girl sitting on the ridge of the field was smiling sweetly. She was as beautiful as a flower and as warm as the sun. Even though there was a faint red scar on her beautiful face that couldn't be erased, all the darkness and sadness seemed to quietly dissipate at this moment in her warm smile. "Brother Lu, are you really okay? You look a bit absent-minded. Do you feel uncomfortable?" Xian asked. Lu Chen smiled. "I'm fine." Xian said, "By the way, I haven't seen Atsu for a few days. How is it?" Lu Chen looked at her and said, "It's fine. It's the same as usual. I can't even see its shadow when it runs around all day." Xian pursed her lips and complained, "That's right. I went to look for it several times during the day, but I didn't see it even once. Brother Lu, it keeps wandering around in the forest all day. I'm always worried that something might happen to it." Lu Chen was silent for a while and said, "What you said makes sense." Xian suddenly became excited and said, "Yes. You didn't listen to me before. Today you actually listened to me." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry. I've been quite busy recently. After this period I'll keep it under control and won't let it run around. You can also come and see it often. Exang giggled and said, okay. Time was unknown in the mountains. Day and night could not be heard in the tree hole. In the ancient mottled tree hole, there seemed to be a kind of gentle light that always shone here. The water in the puddle on the ground seemed to be slightly murkier than before, but it was still clear enough to see the bottom of the water. On the ground around the puddle, the strange blood lines had long disappeared. Now there were only a few traces of blood left on the ground. There was no one in the tree hole, but there was a dog. Black Dog Atu's entire body was wrapped tightly in white cloth. It looked just like a white dog. It lay on the ground beside the puddle and slept for a long time. Then it opened its eyes. The only eye it had left. The gentle light shone into Atsu's eyes. At first it was a little surprised, but soon it seemed to remember this familiar place and quickly calmed down. It turned its head and looked around. It found that Lu Qin was not here. This discovery made it a little worried, but soon it realized that it was the only dog here, so it calmed down again. During this time, its eyes occasionally swept across the water, and it suddenly froze. There was a strange thing reflected in the water, a monster that was tightly wrapped in white cloth, and only its mouth, nose, and one eye were exposed. Atsu shrank back subconsciously. Then, as if it had noticed something, it shook its head at the monster in the water. The monster in the water also tilted its head. Atsu suddenly seemed to be a little happier, as if it had found something fun. It began to shake its head at the water, and after a while it stopped. It felt a little thirsty. It moved its body, approached the puddle, and stretched its head to drink the water. The water rippled and the sweet water slid down its throat. Atsu felt a lot better. But at this moment, it suddenly saw a shadow in the water. In its eyes, a black flame slowly lit up, burning quietly. Bang! A sound came and Lu Qin appeared in this tree hole. He patted his clothes, stood up, and walked behind Atsu. He looked at it and said with a little surprise, "Hey, you're awake?" Atsu, who was lying by the water, slowly turned its head and looked at Lu Qin with its only eye. In the deepest part of its pupils, in an unknown place, a little black flame was burning faintly. That night, when it was dark in the mountains of Kunlun, the moon was dark and the wind was strong. Soon no one stayed outside. Lu Qin carried Atsu and walked quietly in the darkness of the night. It was as if he had merged with the surrounding shadows and no one could detect him. After walking for a long time, Lu Qin stopped under a big tree. He first looked around and then with one hand holding Atsu, who could not move, he easily climbed to the top of the tree trunk and hid in the dark. In his arms, Atsu looked around curiously, as if it didn't know why Lu Qin brought it here. Lu Qin didn't take any further action. He just sat on a branch with Atsu in his arms and then whispered in its ear, "Don't bark. Wait here for a while." Atsu was a little confused. It looked at Lu Qin, but it still listened to Lu Qin's words and quietly nestled in his chest. On this chilly night, the man and the dog sat in the dense thicket and waited quietly. The night was getting darker and the mountain wind was getting colder. The night in Kunlun seemed to be emotionless. It looked at the world coldly, and it looked at the vicissitudes of life. Lu Qin closed his eyes and waited in silence. From his angle, he could see the house in the distance through the gap between the branches and leaves. He didn't know when it was, but it was probably late at night. Finally, a figure came back from the distance. He walked quickly in the night and soon returned to the house. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped as if he felt something. But when he turned his head and looked around, he didn't find anything. He frowned and finally walked back to his house. In the deep shade of the trees in the darkness, Lu Qin lowered his head and whispered in Atsu's ear, "Don't bark." Atsu looked at him and then nodded. Only then did Lu Qin slowly let go of his palm that was covering Atsu's ear. He stared at Atsu, and then he saw Atsu's throat emit a harsh and fierce growl. Under the creepy scar, it opened its mouth, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. "I know," Lu Qin looked at it and said faintly. Chapter 137. A green leaf rolled a few times from the old eaves tiles, then floated in the wind, swept across the alley and slowly fell in the distance. In the deserted little shop, there was a pot of hot tea and 2 cups. Hot steam rose from the clear tea and floated in the air, exuding a unique fragrance. "How does it taste?" "This is a rare top-grade tea," Lu Qin asked Old Ma. Old Ma smacked his lips a few times, then said seriously, "I can't taste it. Feels similar to my crude tea." "Brute." Lu Qin glanced at him disdainfully and shook his head. He picked up the teacup in his hand and took another sip, saying, Smell the aroma and taste the mellow aftertaste in your mouth. It's at least 10 times better than those lousy teas of yours. Old Ma grinned and said, I still feel that my black tea is strong enough, comfortable to drink. This tea is too bland, there's no taste at all. Lu Qin waved his hand at him. It seemed that he had already given up on this fat man's taste. Old Ma laughed, kicked a package from the side and put it on the table, then said to Lu Qin, these are the things you want, they're all bought. I say, why do you want these messy things for no reason? Those bones can barely be regarded as spiritual materials, but what do you want the cinnabar charm brush for? Do you want to draw talismans? He stared at Lu Qin and said, I don't remember you learning this skill. Lu Qin laughed in ridicule as he casually took the bag and placed it by his side, and then he said bluntly with disdain, let's not talk about whether I know talismans or not. Just based on my natural talent, I know everything I learn. How much do you know about me? Stop bragging. Why do I feel that it's you who is bragging? The alley outside the house was deep and quiet, and the fragrance of tea lingered in the house. Two people sat facing each other. Last time you asked me to investigate the matter of those two women, there was some news recently. Old Ma lowered his voice and said to Lu Qin. Lu Qin's hand that was pouring tea paused for a moment before he said, go ahead. There's nothing unusual about Su Qingjun, but that little girl from the Bai family seems a little strange. Lu Qin frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Speaking of which, these two people are really difficult to investigate. Right now, they are treasures in the eyes of the various families, and it is too late to guard them to the death. Fortunately, the two of them are very famous, so some stories and rumors still spread in private. Old Ma didn't immediately point out what was strange but sighed first. Rumor? Lu Qin glanced at him and said, can that thing be trusted? Old Ma shrugged and said, there's no other way. These two girls are now closely watched by the two aristocratic families and the Kunlun party. If the investigation is a little too big, it will alert the enemy, so we can only take it slow. Do you want to hear these rumors? If not, then wait for a while and see what else I can find out. Lu Qin took a sip of tea and said, since we have nothing to do, let's hear it. Su Qingjun has been the legitimate daughter of the eldest branch since she was young, and her talent was confirmed early on, so she has always been doted on by the Su family and is seen as a pearl in the palm. Every step she took was the best. She hired the best teachers to study and learn how to read. She cultivated the best and most suitable cultivation methods and divine arts. She was intelligent, knowledgeable, and well-mannered. On top of that, she was born with a beauty that would cause flowers to blush and the moon to block the moon. In any case, I have never seen such a perfect woman. Old Ma sighed and said with emotion, I don't know which man in the future will have the good fortune to become a cultivation companion with such a woman. Lu Qin said, I don't know about others, but I don't think you have any hope. Old Ma said angrily, you talk too much. You make it sound like you have hope. Lu Qin laughed heartily, raised the teacup, and drained it in one gulp. Old Ma ignored him and continued, compared to Su Qingjun, that girl White Lotus is a little strange. It is said that she is not the daughter of the main branch of the Bai family, but the child of a distant branch. 2 years ago, no one had even heard of her. It is as if a peerless genius suddenly appeared in the Bai family overnight. Lu Qin slowly put down the wine cup and looked at Old Ma. Old Ma was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Lu Qin nodded and said, it sounds like there is indeed something strange. Old Ma said, I have carefully inquired about it, but all the information is from the past 2 years. When that girl was 8 or 9 years old or even earlier, everything is blank. No one has mentioned her, and it seems that no one knows. Lu Qin's fingers gently rubbed on the table. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, but if there is a problem with White Lotus's background, the Kunlun party will definitely not allow her to be accepted by Hakushin Jinkuan. Old Ma nodded and said, of course. What kind of status does Hakushin Jinkuan have? His successor will definitely be thoroughly investigated by the Kunlun party. Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, during my days on Kunlun Mountain, I have heard rumors about Hakushin Jinkuan and the Bai family in private several times. Are they related? Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, I know that. There is indeed no relationship. Bai Qin is the Taoist name bestowed by Patriarch Tianhong in the past. The word, Bai, should be a coincidence. Lu Qin tersely acknowledged his words and said, then continue investigating. Let's slow down on Su Qingjun for now. We have to investigate White Lotus in detail, especially her experiences before she came to the Bai family. It's best if we can dig it out. A faint red light flashed. Su Qingjun, who was wearing a beautiful scarlet feather shawl, walked in. She first bowed to Melaleuca japonica and smiled. "Greetings, Shirshu Melaleuca japonica." Melaleuca japonica smiled. "You are now Jean Dan Friar. No need to be so polite. Come and sit with us." Su Qingjun smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, Uncle Master." She walked over as she spoke. EXN stood up and smiled at Su Qingjun. "Sister Su, you are here." Su Qingjun nodded and smiled. "Yes. I haven't seen sister for a few days. You seem to have become more beautiful." EXIN smiled. She poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Su Qingjun. "Sister, have some tea." Su Qingjun thanked her. After taking a sip, she said to Melaleuca japonica, "Shirshu, I came here this time to thank you." Melaleuca japonica waved her hand. "It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning." Su Qingjun, however, said earnestly, "The red amber pill isn't easy to refine. Not to mention the amount of spirit materials used, you've spent a lot of effort to refine a spirit pill for me and help me break through to the golden core realm. I'll never forget your kindness. Even my father specifically told me to show my gratitude to Martial Uncle respectfully." She took out a jade box from her side and presented it to Melaleuca japonica with both hands. "This is a small token of my appreciation. I can't repay Shirshu's kindness. I hope Shirshu will accept it." Melaleuca japonica smiled. She looked at Su Qingjun for a moment. Then she took the jade box and sighed. "Your father is really lucky to have such an outstanding daughter like you. I really pity you." Su Qingjun lowered her head slightly. She blushed, looking as beautiful as a fairy. She was like a lily swaying in the wind. "Shirshu is too kind." Yen Luo sized her up and said with a smile, "Your aura is calm and steady. Does this mean that your cultivation base has almost stabilized?" Su Qingjun said, "Almost. But recently I still feel a little flustered and short of breath when I cultivate. My master has already told me to eat some eagle fruit. It should be able to get rid of it in about a month." Melaleuca japonica nodded. "Yes. The eagle fruit is very beneficial to your dark moon arts. Your master is right." Su Qingjun smiled. She stood up and said, "That's why I came here this time to ask for your help." Chapter 138. Melaleuca japonica was a bit surprised and said, "Eagle fruit is precious, but it can still be found. You can find it in the Baichao Tang Medicine Hall on the mountain and in the many spiritual material shops in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain. You don't need my help." Su Qingjun smiled and seemed a bit embarrassed. She said, "Martial Uncle, my master means that I like freshly picked eagle fruit the best." Melaleuca japonica was startled for a moment. She looked pensive and suddenly lowered her head to open the lid of the jade box in her hand. She took a look inside and her expression changed slightly. Then she became silent. After a moment she sighed and said, "It seems that senior martial brother Muyuan really has great expectations for you." Su Qingjun slightly bowed her head with a smile on her face. She didn't explain further and just said softly, "I sincerely ask Martial Uncle to fulfill my wish. Qingjun can't thank you enough." Melaleuca japonica closed the jade box in her hand. After thinking for a moment she nodded and said, "All right, I'll arrange this. You can go now. There will probably be news in a few days. I'll let you know when the time comes." Su Qingjun bowed deeply to her and said with a respectful expression, "Thank you, Martial Uncle." Melaleuca japonica sighed and got up to avoid her. Then she went forward to hold Su Qingjun's hand and walked out with her. She said, "Qingjun, your future is promising and your achievements are limitless. You really don't need to be so polite to an old woman like me. I can't accept it." Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "Martial Uncle, what are you talking about?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and waved her hand to stop her. She said, "It's okay. We both know what to do. Anyway, I'll remember this. Just wait for my news." Su Qingjun nodded and thanked Melaleuca japonica again. Then she smiled and said goodbye to EXN, who came out behind Melaleuca japonica before leaving. Watching the beautiful woman's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, EXN couldn't help but show a trace of envy. She said to Melaleuca japonica, "Martial Uncle, Sister Su is really amazing. Whether it is cultivation, talent, appearance or bearing, she's perfect." Melaleuca japonica smiled and didn't say anything. Then she turned and walked back to the room. EXN followed up and asked curiously, "Oh right, Martial Uncle, why did you have such a big reaction when Sister Su said she wanted fresh eagle fruit?" Melaleuca japonica snorted and said, "What do you know? There's a lot of knowledge in that sentence." EXN was instantly interested. she pulled Melaleuca japonica's arm and said with a smile, "Martial uncle, tell me about it." Melaleuca japonica rolled her eyes and said, "Make tea." Okay. EXN smiled and quickly poured the cold tea. Then she made a new cup of hot tea and placed it in front of Melaleuca japonica. Then she said with a smile, "Martial uncle, teach me. Let me broaden my horizons." Melaleuca japonica took a sip of tea and sighed. The eagle fruit has many uses. Although it's precious, it's not a particularly rare spiritual ingredient. It's nothing much. However, there's something special about this kind of spiritual fruit. When it ripens, it naturally emits a pure spiritual energy. When the petals open, the energy will spread out for about 10 minutes. If you eat the eagle fruit during this time, the effect will increase by 10%. 10%? Yexin said in surprise. That's right. Only 10%. Melaleuca japonica said calmly, because no one can pick the eagle fruit at the right time to eat it. All the eagle fruits on the market are picked and preserved. Since there's not much difference in effect, no one cares about it. EXN looked outside the door and said, "Then why did Sister Sue, her Shifu, tell her to eat fresh fruits?" "That's what I was talking about." Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Her Shifu Masato Kihara really has high expectations of her. She spares no effort in even these minor details. In this way, if there are no accidents, her foundation in the future will be almost perfect. At least in the Yuanying realm, maybe she'll have a little more confidence." Yexen was stunned for a moment. Then she shook her head and sighed. Different people have different fates. Sister Sue is really lucky. Lucky? Melaleuca japonica looked at her and smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The light and shadow distorted in midair. After a while, Lu Chen's figure appeared in the tree hole. Atsu, who was lying on the ground and feeling bored, suddenly raised its head. It barked and limped over. At this moment, some of the white cloth on Atsu's body had been removed, but more than half of its body was still tied up. It looked a little miserable. However, Atsu's tenacious and amazing vitality was once again displayed at this moment. After receiving treatment from Lu Chen, such serious injuries began to rapidly improve. Now, it could even walk with some difficulty. Lu Chen squatted down, hugged Atsu's head and patted it. Then he first checked its various wounds, nodded and took out a bag of meat and threw it to it. Atsu immediately barked with joy, wagged its tail and then lowered its head to eat. Lu Chen sat down and patted its head. Then he said, "You must be suffocated here. Bear with it a little longer. When your injuries are healed, you will be able to leave soon." Atsu raised its head and looked at him. It rubbed its head against his hand and then lowered its head to continue eating the meat. However, after a few bites, it suddenly raised its head and stared at Lu Chen with its only eye. It let out a few low growls. Its sharp, snow-white fangs were revealed at the side of its mouth. Even its eyes seemed to be cold. It was just like those bloodthirsty and crazy black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos. The ancient bestiality hidden in the depths of blood seemed to be emitting from this black dog bit by bit. Lu Chen looked at it quietly. After a while he said faintly, "Don't worry. We will take revenge eventually." Atsu looked at him. After a while, it wagged its tail and then lowered its head to eat the meat again. Lu Chen sat at the side and watched it eat non-stop. He watched as the white cloth gradually recovered its vitality and its shiny black fur, as well as the aura of a wild beast that was gradually revealed. Lu Chen remained silent. It was another day when the morning light shone down. The fresh air turned into a gentle breeze, blowing over the top of the flowing fragrance garden. Most of the handyman disciples came here on time to work, so did Lu Chen. But this day was a little different from usual. Jean Dan Fryer, who was in charge of this area, came here with another female practitioner, Melaleuca japonica, who had white hair and a ruddy complexion. They then picked 8 people according to the name list and told them not to plant their own spirit herbs for the time being. Together, they came to the other side of the garden to a relatively independent and wider spiritual field. There were many trees planted in this spiritual field, all of the same kind. Some had already borne fruit and the fruits were different from the others. They were green with red, oddly shaped, and somewhat resembled an eagle's beak. Lin Xing did not immediately lecture them. Instead, he had been standing on the side with Melaleuca japonica, whispering to them. The other 8 handyman disciples stood silently beside the spiritual field, many of them looking puzzled. Lu Chen was among the 8. Coincidentally, He Changxing was also there. When he turned around to look at the people around him, he saw He Changxing. He Changxing seemed to be looking at him as well. For some reason, He Changxing looked much better than before. He no longer had that flustered and exasperated look on his face, nor did he have that violent temper. He looked much gentler. He even smiled at Lu Qin and nodded at him when Lu Qin looked at him. But if one looked closely, one would vaguely find that there was a trace of strange doubt hidden in the depths of He Changxing's eyes. He also seemed to be secretly watching Lu Qin, as if he wanted to see something from Lu Qin. But in contrast, Lu Qin did not seem to have anything strange at all. He had been standing there quietly. Occasionally he would meet He Changxing's eyes and he would nod calmly and politely. He was neither angry nor close, just the same as usual. He Changxing looked at Lu Qin for a long time, and the doubt in his eyes deepened. After a while, Lin Xing ended his conversation with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that he had a clear idea of what was going on. He stood up and began to speak to the 8 handyman disciples that he had gathered. The content of his speech was not too complicated. It was nothing more than a rare 2-vein spiritual material, the eagle fruit, planted in this spiritual field. Because someone in the sect was in urgent need of this material, everyone was required to carefully cultivate it. If it was planted well, there would naturally be a reward, and the reward would be twice as much as usual. In addition to the usual harvest rewards, spiritual stones would be directly given to the person who planted the best. At this, the handyman disciples were all moved. In terms of rewards alone, this was unprecedented. And some people could also see that this time, the 8 people called over by Lin Xing were almost the best in spiritual power cultivation among the handyman disciples in the herb garden. Obviously, this task assigned by the sect this time was for the one with the best results. With this tacit understanding and requirement, the 8 people quickly got into the mood and went down to the spiritual field. Lin Xing nodded with satisfaction. He walked to the edge of the field and said to Melaleuca japonica, "Senior Sister Yin, what do you think?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Thank you for your help. It's a pity that this kind of thing could actually be done by the Foundation Establishment disciples. After all, the handyman disciples have low cultivation, and their control of the 5 elements of spiritual power is still lacking." Lin Xing smiled and said, "Who said it wasn't? But as long as the official disciples have a bit of talent, they all see this kind of farming and mulberry planting as lowly and menial work. Even if they have nothing to do, they would definitely not come here to do this. Otherwise, if it was spread out, it would be a great humiliation. They would only feel that their status would be greatly lowered, and they would not do it even if they died. So I don't know how this trend started. What a pity." Melaleuca japonica was a little helpless and said, "That's true. Forget it. Anyway, now that it's like this, we can only pick the tall ones from the short ones. Let's choose the best one." Lin Xing smiled and said, "That's the only way." Chapter 139. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, even in the Kunlun party, which had many rules. In fact, the Kunlun party had existed for too long, and the various big and small forces in the sect were intertwined, making it even harder to keep a secret. Perhaps in the beginning it could be kept a secret for a while, but as time went on, more and more people knew about this matter, and the rumors would naturally spread. The eagle fruit cultivated this time was prepared for the hottest young genius in the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. This news leaked out very quickly, and then among the odd-job disciples who participated in this competition, those who had a background, backing, or connections naturally knew about it, while those who didn't have a background remained in the dark. He Changxing belonged to the kind of 3 no people who didn't have a background, backing, or connections, so he didn't know about this secret. However, he wasn't an idiot. From the scale of this competition and the cautiousness of the 2 Jin Dan friar appearing at the same time, anyone would know that this matter was of great importance. He also saw that something was wrong from the expressions and movements of the other odd-job disciples, but no one would specifically come over to tell him anything. He Changxing was very depressed and angry about this, but what he could do was to do his part as he had done in the past, and hope that through this competition, there would be a chance for a carp to jump over the dragon's gate. Lu Chen's situation was actually similar to He Changxing's. At least, he was an ordinary person with no background and backing, but he had a way out. At dusk that day, EXN secretly ran to his residence and found him. She pulled him aside and whispered to him for a long time. In the end, she solemnly said to him, "Brother Lu, do you understand? You can't miss this opportunity." Lu Chen lay down on the bed, put his hands behind his head and said with a smile, "You came running to me like this, aren't you afraid that others will find out and punish you?" EXN snorted and said unconcernedly, "I'm not the only one. Those people from aristocratic families all had their superiors leak information to them. Besides, I heard it from Martial Aunt Melaleuca japonica. She didn't specifically tell me not to say it, so it's fine for me to tell you. Lu Qin patted the bed and said, "All right, I know what to do. Sai, it's so nice to have someone in the imperial court. It's so easy to get things done." Exian's eyes narrowed as she smiled, but she quickly widened them again. She said to Lu Qin, "Brother Lu, don't be careless. Once you're chosen, you can go to Sister Su's side." Lu Qin was startled and said, "What do you mean?" Exan laughed and lowered her voice, saying, "Even the people outside don't know about this. Marshal Aunt Melaleuca Japonica only told me. It's good that you know, but don't let it slip." Lu Qin looked at her for a long time. He suddenly smiled and patted the edge of the bed, saying, "Little girl, you're amazing. Come and sit, let's talk." "Nonsense, there's still a lot of things you don't know about me." Exn laughed proudly, then said in a low voice, "Actually, in this competition to plant the eagle fruit, it's just to pick out the person with the best Ling cultivation, and then go to Sister Su's side, because she wants to eat the fresh eagle fruit." She told Lu Qin about the eagle fruit in a low voice and finally said, "In order to obtain the fresh and perfect eagle fruit, Marshal Aunt Melaleuca Japonica spent a lot of effort to transplant 7 eagle fruit trees from the flowing fragrance garden, and directly plant them in the exclusive Ling fields in Sister Su's cave. What's next is to have people watch over them day and night and carefully cultivate them. The date of bearing fruit is almost set. One tree will bear fruit every 3 days. When it bears fruit, people will be called immediately, and when it's ripe, it will be eaten without any delay. In this way, in 21 days it will be a success. Sister Su's serene moon arts will no longer be obstructed, and she can cultivate all the way to the peak of the Jindan realm." Lu Qin fell silent after hearing this, and after a long while he nodded and said, "So that's how it is." Exan said curiously, "Brother Lu, why does your complexion look so bad?" Lu Qin shook his head, smiled bitterly and said, "It's nothing, it's just that after hearing you say this, I suddenly feel that on this path of cultivation, she and I are really worlds apart." Exn laughed out loud and covered her mouth as she laughed and said, "Look at what you're saying, there's definitely a world of difference between us. Not to mention that Sister Su's family is rich with countless wealth and goods. Even if it's natural talent, the difference is still too great. So, Sister Su is a genius, she was born with a good life and can't be forced. Look, I'm not jealous, I'm even happy for her." Lu Qin looked at her and smiled after a while and said, "You're right, natural talent can't be forced." Exn nodded and then warned him, "In short, Brother Lu, you just have to know. If you can be chosen this time, not only will Sister Su owe you a favor, you might even have the chance to get closer to her. With this friendship, in the future in the Kunlun party, no one will dare to bully you." Lu Qin smiled and said, "All right, I understand." Exn stared at him, and seemed to be even more nervous than when she was competing herself. She clenched her fists and said, "You must win." Lu Qin patted his chest and said, "It has to be me, don't worry." Exn laughed and seemed to have some trust in him and seemed to be full of confidence. The cultivation of the eagle fruit was not easy. This kind of spiritual fruit grew on the eagle fruit tree, and its trunk was slender, and its root system was developed. To adjust the spiritual energy of the 5 elements in the soil of the spiritual field was much more strenuous than normal spiritual grass, and it basically took a whole day. The odd job disciples who were chosen to participate in this competition were all very hard-working, but due to their limited cultivation, after a whole day of cultivation, they all looked pale and exhausted by dusk. When the sun set, everyone left. Different from the grass garden, even if the odd job disciples left, this special spiritual field was still guarded by Melaleuca Japonica's people, in case of any accidents. When He Changxing left, he was quite satisfied, especially when he saw that there were people guarding the spiritual field, and he felt a lot more relieved. The disciples of the rich and powerful families were really evil, colluding with each other to suppress ordinary disciples like him. They were really evil. Fortunately, the Kunlun party was a righteous sect, and there were good people like Melaleuca Japonica and Lin Sheng, who were fair and just, so he did not enter this sect in vain. If he really had the opportunity to cultivate in the future, he would definitely thank these 2 benefactors. With this thought in mind, he walked back to his house. Unknowingly, the sky had already darkened, and the sun was setting in the west. It was going to be dark soon. He Changxing massaged his back and felt a little sore. Since he was an odd job disciple, his talent was naturally not high, and his cultivation was also average. When he was working in the grass garden, he did not really work hard for a whole day like today, and it was really tiring. But for the dream of the future, it was worth it. He was thinking about the beautiful future, and like every ordinary young man, He dreamed that one day he would stand out from the rest of the world, and his cultivation would be the best in Kunlun. By then all the Yuanying Jinren, including the sect leader, would kneel at his feet, and countless beautiful female disciples, with Su Qingjun as the leader, would look at him with deep affection, and softly ask to be his Taoist companion. These days were really too good. When he pushed open his door and walked in, there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, and he could not help but whistle. At this moment, a palm suddenly flew from behind the door, and heavily chopped the back of his neck, and even faintly heard a low muffled sound. He Changxing's eyes rolled, and without even making a sound, he directly fell forward. Behind him, the door of the house slowly closed. The night was dark and the mountain wind blew. The darkness was like a nightmare, always entangled him and made He Changxing feel very painful. But inexplicably, in that darkness he recalled the first half of his life. He once had a family. However, the biggest impression that his family had left on him was that the family had declined ever since he was young. From his grandfather's generation to his father's, it seemed that everyone was reminiscing about the glory of their ancestors, and then complaining and cursing at the reality in front of them, feeling indignant. But reality was reality. In the midst of complaining and cursing, the family still continued to decline uncontrollably. When he grew up, the He family was already destitute. He was very poor and dejected. Apart from the old house, he had nothing. However, he still remembered the obsession of his father and grandfather. He reminisced about the glory of the past that he had never seen. Gradually, he regarded restoring this glory as his duty. No one can stand in my way, and I will definitely restore the reputation of the family. I will succeed in my cultivation, become a spiritual master, and then rebuild the family business, marry a... No, what kind of identity is a spiritual master? Of course, I will marry a lot of wives, have a lot of children, and then buy countless wealth and goods. I will be better than the Su family, the Bai family, and the Lin family in Kunwu City. That beautiful scene seemed to be shining with golden light. He even laughed out loud in his dreams. Then he woke up. After waking up, he felt pain as if his neck was being cut open. Then, when he turned his head with difficulty, he found that his hands and feet were tightly bound and thrown on the floor of the room, and there was an oil lamp on the table next to him, illuminating the room. There was another person in the room at the same time. "You're awake." That person's back was facing him, but for some reason, he seemed to be able to sense that He Changxing had woken up. But he didn't turn his head and just faintly spoke. That voice was low and slightly hoarse, and it sounded very unfamiliar. He Changxing felt that he had never heard it before, but after a while, he inexplicably felt that it was somewhat familiar. He opened his eyes with difficulty and saw that the person's back was facing him. The person was holding a strange talisman brush in his hand, and he was drawing something on the white wall of his room. The traces drawn by the tip of the brush were as red as blood, and strange lines appeared on the white wall like the grin of a demon. Chapter 140. The strokes on the white wall were incomparably bright red and looked very much like it was smeared with fresh blood. At the same time, because it was too full, droplets of blood beads flowed down in a somewhat messy manner, leaving behind a number of thin blood stains, making one's hair stand on end just by looking at it. That person silently and patiently drew, as if what he was doing was a very important matter, but as the seal brush in his hand continuously waved, his voice once again came over. Most of the people in this world are very gullible. Many times whatever other people say they will believe it. For example, this reincarnation formation. For many years many people in the world thought that it was incomparably evil, often killing people to take their blood and smearing it into the formation. In fact, it is not so exaggerated. That person raised his arm, drew a stroke, then turned his head to take a look and said, "Those who really need human blood, that is the supreme supernatural power of the evil sect, and killing people to take their blood is very troublesome. How can it be as comfortable as using cinnabar, right?" Under the candlelight, that person's face was wearing a black mask, covering his entire face, leaving only two dark and deep eye sockets. He Changxing did not know why, suddenly felt a burst of fear, cried out, "You, who are you? What do you want to do?" That person laughed behind the mask. The laughter was hoarse. After a moment he did not answer He Changxing's question, only indifferently pointed to his side and said, "If your voice is a little louder, I will use it to cut off your tongue." He Changxing's body trembled, with some difficulty turned his head to look. As expected, on the ground not far from his head, there was a black short sword stabbed into the ground. It looked extremely sharp, reflecting a chilling light in the candlelight. Other than that, he also saw that around his body, on the ground, there were a number of small and crooked holes, the thickness of a finger. He did not know what exactly it was used for. A chill enveloped his entire body. He Changxing's face turned pale for some reason. Although this mysterious person did not look like a fiend, that kind of indifferent tone instead made people even more terrified. He Changxing saw that the masked person turned around again, continued to paint those strange formations on the wall. After a few deep breaths he stammered, "You, who are you? Where did I offend you?" That person did not respond, quietly painted, blood-like marks spread out on the white wall, indistinctly like a bloody door was about to form. Evil sect, evil sect. He Changxing's panting became more and more urgent. Suddenly he urgently said, "This big brother, I did not provoke your evil sect, let me go, let me go." The talisman brush was filled with cinnabar. It tapped on a spot on the white wall heavily like a finishing touch. It seemed that the lifeless bloodstains suddenly had some aura. Then, between the bloodstains, a bloody door seemed to be open, as if evil ghosts would rush out from behind the bloody door in the next moment. That person turned around, put down the brush and then walked to He Changxing's side, looked down at him, then quietly said, "You did not provoke the evil sect, but you are useful to me." He glanced at that mysterious and twisted horrifying blood door on the white wall, quietly laughed and said, "I have searched for a long time and still could not find those companions, so I can only think of a way to let them come out themselves." He Changxing did not understand the meaning of this person's words but instinctively felt an indescribable fear. His teeth started to chatter, chattering, said, "You, what do you mean?" That person looked at him, squatted down beside him, but did not seem to have the intention to make a move, instead looked at He Changxing's face. After a while from behind the mask came a sigh. After a long while, he was heard saying in a low voice, "Bullying the weak, fiendish, greedy for life when encountering a strong enemy, afraid of death, everyone is like that. Standing in the light, modest and respectful, in the dark and scrupulous? Probably one day, no, should be a long time ago, I may also become like that." That masked person faintly muttered to himself. A pair of dark eyes looked at He Changxing, who was tightly bound and unable to move. His eyes did not seem to have the slightest emotion, other than a stretch of indifference. He Changxing suddenly felt that he was like a pig waiting to be slaughtered. That ice-cold sense of despair seemed to turn up from every corner of his body, making him tremble incessantly. He desperately twisted his body but it was useless. It only made him look like a twisted worm, unexpectedly ugly. At the same time he once again begged this person, shedding tears, begging him to let him go, and then he was willing to pay any price. That masked person took a ball of cloth and directly gagged his mouth. He Changxing's mouth made muffled sounds, his eyes revealed despair, and a trace of pain and regret. That masked person looked at him, suddenly smiled and said, "Are you regretting that you didn't shout for help just now?" He Changxing stared at this person, his eyes like they were about to spit fire, as if he could not wait to cut this person into 1,000 pieces. But that masked person shook his head and then gently said, "I have already arranged a soundproof formation around this house. No matter how much you shout, no one will be able to hear. Saying like this, you will most likely be able to die in peace, right?" He Changxing's body suddenly stiffened, the despair in his eyes became more intense, and when he looked at this masked person again, the fear in his eyes also deepened. That masked person casually picked up the black dagger that was inserted into the ground, gently crossed it in front of him and said, "Do you know in the evil faction, there is an extremely terrible torture, used to punish people who have committed a great sin. That torture is called blood dripping. Tie the sinner to the ground, cover his eyes, and then cut open his blood vessels bit by bit. This way the sinner will hear drip, drip, sounds slowly flowing out from his body, dripping to the ground. Then there will be countless terrible blood-devouring insects from the wounds on your body, into your flesh, bit by bit eating everything in your body, and you can even hear those chewing sounds. Isn't it very interesting?" The muscles on He Changxing's face violently trembled, his head desperately shook, his mouth as if he had gone crazy, strange sounds, his face without the slightest trace of blood. The masked man looked at him, then reached out and took out a small cloth bag. He shook it in front of He Changxing's eyes. Suddenly there was a sha-sha sound like sand rolling, but also like the sound of countless insects rubbing and biting each other. He Changxing's mouth cried out, "Ah!" twice, his eyes stiffened, with indescribable fear staring at that small bag. After a moment, his lower body was wet. The masked person put down the bag, took out another item, it was an eye mask, and then slowly put it on He Changxing's face, quietly said, "Let's begin." He Changxing wailed, struggled with all his might, but right now like a fish on the chopping board. In the end it was useless. Soon, his eyes were covered by a black blindfold, and he was completely drowned in darkness. An icy chill like a merciless blade fell on his right wrist. He Changxing's body instantly began to tremble violently, but the icy cold intent seemed to be indestructible. In an instant, it seeped into his flesh and blood and pressed down fiercely. Drip! He Changxing suddenly held his breath. Drip! The surroundings suddenly turned dark, a stretch of silence, only that soft but clear sound, like a drop of water falling. Drip! The sound of every drop seemed to have the same interval. Every drop of water was like a terrible hammer fiercely beating his soul. Every blow was enough to make one's soul fly away and scatter. However, the nightmare did not seem to be over. In that terrible and clear dripping sound, suddenly there was a thin sha-sha sound, like the sound of insects crawling, echoing in his ears. A frighteningly cold and numb feeling came from his wound. He Changxing could no longer bear it, let out a heart-wrenching roar, but all the sound in the end was blocked in the depths of his throat. The night wind was bleak, someone blew out the candles, darkness surged, plunging the world into a shadow. The masked person slowly stood up, coldly looking at the person in front of him, whose entire body was like sifting chaff, to the point that he did not even look like a human, put away the small bag in his hand, then turned and walked out. Behind him, in the small twisted tunnels on the ground, bright red liquid was slowly dripping, making an orderly sound. When the door opened, there was a low squeak sound. Looking at the world outside the house, it was already late at night. He closed the door, walked to the dark side of the road and sat down under the big tree. The dark shadow of the tree was hazy, covering his figure. After a moment, a black shadow walked out from behind the tree. It was a black dog sniffing around and coming to his side. The masked person took off his mask. With the dim light, the outline of his face could be seen clearly. It was Lu Chen. He looked a little tired, even the light in his eyes was a little dim. Atsu stood in the darkness, staring at him. After a while, it leaned over, gently rubbing its head against Lu Chen's arm. Lu Chen reached out and hugged it, gently touched Atsu's head and whispered, "It's done." Atsu let out a low whimper as if in response to his words. Lu Chen looked up at the dark night, a trace of complex emotions flashed through the depths of his eyes. After a moment he picked up the small bag. Atsu's eyes stared at the small bag, unblinking. Lu Chen also looked at the small bag, looked for a while and suddenly said to Atsu, "You see, I was right? There are so many people in this world, they believe whatever others say." He gently loosened his hand, the rope at the mouth of the bag fell in the night wind, the sand inside was blown up by the wind, drifting into the quiet and cold depths of the night. Chapter 141. When the morning light shone, Lu Chen walked out of the door yawning. Together with many other servant disciples, he walked towards the direction of the fragrance garden. Along the way he met many fellow disciples he knew, and they greeted each other. One or two of them who were more familiar with him even joked with him, "Did you not sleep well last night?" "I didn't sleep enough. I work every day. I'm exhausted." Lu Chen shook his head and sighed. The servant disciples beside him all nodded. It seemed that everyone felt the same way. The various rules of the Kunlun party, such as squeezing the servant disciples and worshipping the talented ones, had long been an open secret. But no matter what, the Kunlun party was still a righteous sect, and it would still give the servant disciples a little hope. As long as one's luck and talent were all there was still a chance for them to make a name for themselves. The hope was small, but the beauty of immortality was enough to make people willing to fight for it. They chatted along the way, and when they reached the fragrance garden, the sun had already risen and shone on the vast herb garden. The wind that blew against their faces also brought with it the unique fragrance of the fragrance garden. Many servant disciples were like diligent bees, flying to their own spiritual fields. Lu Chen also walked among the crowd and came to the place where the eagle fruit tree was planted. When he stood on the ridge beside the spiritual field, he could not help but look up at the sky. The sky was bright and the sun was bright. It was a good day. The rest of the people soon arrived, and after a while Melaleuca Japonica and Lin Sheng, the two Jindan friar, also arrived. Just as everyone was about to start, Lin Sheng, who was calling the roll, suddenly frowned and said loudly, "Wait a minute, one person is missing." Everyone stopped in their tracks in shock and looked back. Melaleuca Japonica was also a little surprised and said, "Such a good opportunity, is there still someone who doesn't know what's good for him? Who is it?" Lin Sheng looked at the list in his hand, and then looked at the servant disciples standing there, including Lu Chen and the others. After a moment of silence he said to Melaleuca Japonica, "A disciple named He Changxing is not here." Melaleuca Japonica snorted and said, "He doesn't know what's good for him." Forget it, ignore him. We can't let so many people stand here and wait for him. Let's start. This was completely reasonable, and Lin Xing had no objection. He immediately ordered everyone to go into the spiritual field to cultivate the eagle fruit tree. At the same time, he looked at the path they had come from, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. Yen Luo was the one who had called for this, but he was the one who had chosen these servant disciples. Now that He Changxing was absent for no reason, even though Yen Luo had no intention of blaming him, this situation was a slap to his face. Lin Xing thought that when this guy came later, he would definitely give him a stern lecture. As for the one who was selected in the end, it seemed that he could not choose this guy. Lin Xing thought so in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He just turned around and looked at the busy disciples in the spiritual field. Lin Xing's idea of giving He Changxing a good scolding never came true, because He Changxing did not come for the whole morning. By noon, Lin Xing's face had begun to turn a little pale, and everyone except for Melaleuca japonica secretly distanced themselves from him. In the middle, Melaleuca japonica turned her head to look at him again, but she did not say anything. Arranging the management of the servant disciples was Lin Xing's job, and it was fine for her to say a few words, but if she interfered too much, it would be crossing the line. Another hour passed and Lin Xing finally could not stand it anymore. He called for a disciple on guard beside him and ordered him to find He Changxing. At this moment, Lin Xing had already made up his mind. If He Changxing could not give a good reason when he came, he would deal with him on the spot and chase this audacious servant disciple out of Fragrance Garden. The disciple on guard received the order and left. The surrounding people, including the busy servant disciples in the spiritual field, were also secretly paying attention to this side. Some of them did not make a sound, but there were also a few who had smiles on their faces. It seemed that they were glad that they had one less opponent. The quiet mountain breeze blew through the herb garden, and the sunlight from the sky seemed to be gentle as well. After less than an hour, the commotion suddenly came from outside the grass garden. The noise seemed to come from afar, but because it was too far away, it could not be heard clearly. However, there seemed to be a few shrill screams mixed in, and then it quickly spread towards the flowing fragrance garden. At the edge of the spiritual field, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Xing had the highest level of cultivation, so they were the first to notice a trace of abnormality. They turned to look at the same time, and not long after, they saw the disciple on guard rush over with a pale face. He suddenly threw himself in front of Lin Xing, and then with a look of horror on his face he stammered, He is dead." "What?" The news of He Changxing's sudden death spread in the blink of an eye in Fragrance Garden. At first, everyone was still surprised, but very quickly many people felt that something was not quite right. The Kunlun party suddenly sent a lot of people to directly seal off the area, forbidding everyone from approaching He Changxing's house. Lin Xing and Melaleuca japonica were the first to arrive at the place, but they did not come out from the house. In the afternoon, the two Yuanying Jinren of Baichao Tang, Xian Deng and Mingzhu also rushed over, and walked into the house with a solemn face. A little later it was dusk, and under the countless watchful eyes the head of Kunlun Jinren Idle Month also came over with a gloomy face. In the huge Kunlun party, it seemed that a storm was coming. All kinds of rumors spread wildly in the Kunlun party. About what happened in the house, why the usually inconspicuous disciple suddenly died, and how it could attract the attention of so many powerful high-level Jinren. There were countless versions of answers to these questions. Some said that the disciple had been squeezed too much, and the pain was unbearable, and he felt that his future was hopeless, so he committed suicide in despair. Someone scoffed and sneered, "What do you know? It's clear that the guy was bullied a few days ago and he couldn't take it anymore, so he died." As for who bullied him, there were only a few bold and evil people in the Kunlun party today. Think about it yourself. Anyway, some people did things in a disgusting way, so be careful of retribution. Someone else said with certainty that the reason why it attracted the attention of so many Jinren was that the situation in the house was too tragic. The house was full of blood and it was a horrible sight, like hell on earth. Someone next to him asked, "How can a person commit suicide to make the house and the ground covered in blood?" Then there was a bout of racking their brains to think about it. In the evening, the news gradually became clearer. There was indeed a murder in the house and someone died, and the deceased was He Changxing. He Changxing died a very, very tragic death. But as for how tragic it was, none of the people who did not enter the house could tell. None of the people who entered the house wanted to speak. At most, they would say the word tragic, with an ugly expression on their faces when they were cornered. When night fell, the Kunlun party had surrounded the house and the surrounding area of dozens of feet. The other disciples who lived in the surrounding area had all been carefully questioned, and after confirming that there were no suspicions, they were arranged to stay. As a result, the place that had been bustling yesterday was as deserted as a ghost town today. Lu Qin lived very far away, so he was not affected and no one came to question him. So when it was dark, he stayed alone in his house, let Atsu lie on his lap, and began to help it untie the cloth. The blood-stained white cloth was thrown aside, revealing the hideous and ugly wounds. From time to time Atsu's body would twitch in pain, but most of the time, it still endured the pain and lay there obediently. Some of the wounds were almost healed, so Lu Qin did not care anymore. He only replaced the most seriously injured parts. It seemed that less than half of Atsu's body was still wrapped in white cloth, and it seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than before. But it seemed to be a little uglier because now Atsu only had one eye and half a tail. When it stood, its limp was getting worse. Only the terrifying scars on its face seemed to add a little more murderous aura to it, making it look a lot fiercer. It's almost healed. Lu Qin looked at the black dog in front of him, then patted its head and said softly. Atsu responded to him and wagged its tail. Lu Qin looked at it and saw that half of its tail was wagging, which looked a little funny and weird. He could not help but sigh. Then he smiled and said, "When it's healed, you have to be careful when you go out to play." In Atsu's one eye, a dark green light flashed, and then it leaned its head on Lu Qin's knee, quietly snuggling up to him. And in a place that Lu Qin could not see, under the layer of dark green light, there was a very faint black, swaying a little. Lu Qin looked out of the window. The dark night was endless, and his expression was also indifferent. After a moment, he waved his hand and the candlelight in the room dimmed. "Go to sleep, we'll see what happens tomorrow." The next day it was still a good weather. The sun hung high in the sky, it was clear and cloudy, the sky was bright, the universe was bright. However, a shadow had already shrouded the Kunlun party. Updated news came out. It only said that a few Yuanying Jinren, led by Jinren Idle Month, were furious. The reason was, in that house He Changxing, who died a horrible death, may have been killed by the people of the Devil Sect of the Three Realms. This was the first time in decades that the Devil Sect killed so brazenly in the Kunlun Mountains, and they showed their horses and carriages, directly revealing their identity. Of course, this was undoubtedly a painful slap in the face of the entire Kunlun sect. How could the Idle Moon Immortal and the others not be incomparably furious? While he was dealing with He Changxing's funeral affairs, he was also cursing the person in charge of the patrolling guards until his face was covered in dirt. When the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall of the Kunlun party, Dukan Jinren, was summoned to Jinren Idle Month's place, he saw a few Jin Dan Friar, who were usually high and mighty, retreating with a pale face. Jinren Idle Month seemed to still be angry, his face was livid. He only nodded when he saw Dukan Jinren, then he did not say any empty words. He directly asked Dukan Jinren, "Your disciple, how is he now?" Chapter 142. Only Taoist Master Xianyu and Taoist Master Du Kong were left in the Heavenly Kuan Peaks Jingyang Hall. There were no outsiders present. In addition, the two of them were very familiar with each other, so they spoke much more casually. However, Tao Master Du Kong couldn't help but be startled when he heard Tao Master Xianyu's question. He replied, "He's still in closed-door meditation." "Senior Brother Sect Master Yu." Tao Master Xianyu sighed. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stretched out his hand and gestured for Tao Master Du Kong to sit down with him. Then he called for someone to serve hot tea. Tao Master Xianyu signaled the servant boy to withdraw from the main hall. Then Tao Master Xianyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. Suddenly he heard Tao Master Du Kong praise the tea. Then he cast a sidelong glance at him and said, "This tea is Little Crane." Dukan Jinren nodded. As the Kunlun party's Heavenly Soldier Hall's first seat for many years, he had seen all kinds of things. However, he smiled bitterly and sighed. "This Little Crane tea is indeed excellent, but I probably won't be able to get it from the E family in the future." As for why he couldn't get the famous Little Crane tea, Dukan Jinren did not say, but these two highly respected perfected ones naturally knew in their hearts. It must be because of the incident where he gang bullied the E family's young lady. Now that the E family and the Kunlun sect were like fire and water, they naturally couldn't get the tea. Dukan Jinren shook his head and stopped thinking about these stupid things. He turned to Perfected Idle Month and said seriously, "Senior brother, you called me here and suddenly asked about my disciple, He. What's the reason?" Perfected Idle Month nodded and pondered for a while. "There was a murder case at Fragrance Garden a few days ago." Did you hear about the death of a servant disciple? Dukan Jinren nodded and said, I've heard about it but I haven't been there to take a look. I only know some rough information. What's wrong, senior brother? Perfected Idol Month casually took out a scroll from her bosom and passed it to him. She said lightly, it's about the situation in the house. Take a look for yourself. Dukan Jinren took it with some doubts. He first glanced at Perfected Idol Month, then lowered his head and began to flip through it. But as he read, his eyebrows frowned slightly, his expression became more and more solemn. For a moment in the huge Jingyang hall, there was only the sound of him flipping pages. After a while, Dukan Jinren finished looking at everything. His face had already become somewhat unsightly. He said in a deep voice, the evil cult is actually so insolent, they are really going too far. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Perfected Idol Month. After hesitating for a while, he said, Senior brother, such a thing happened, and you suddenly asked about He just now. Could it be that you want him to let him come to see me? Perfected Idol Month stretched out her fingers and rubbed between her eyebrows. She said lightly, I know you have high expectations of He, but his younger brother did indeed provoke public anger in the matter a few days ago. As the elder brother, he also did something wrong. It's inevitable to punish him. A trace of joy appeared on Dukan Jinren's face. He stood up and said, Of course. In fact, if it wasn't for senior brother sect leader who came forward to mediate for me that day, Xiandeng and Mingzhu from Baichao Tang might not have been willing to let this matter go so easily. I have always been grateful for this. Perfected Idol Month nodded. She looked at Dukan Jinren with a trace of satisfaction in her eyes. She said, It's good that you know what you are doing. After the battle in the desolate valley 10 years ago, the evil cult has been on the decline for many years. Very few people in the sect had contact with those evildoers. Only your disciple He met with an accident in the land of chaos a few years ago. He fought with the remnants of the evil cult several times. I heard that it was a few years? 3 years. Dukan Jinren immediately replied, That child is strong-willed and unyielding. Because his family members died in the hands of the evil cult's demons, he hated the evil cult to the core. Therefore he fought with those evildoers in the land of chaos for a long time. After 3 years, both sides suffered heavy losses before he returned to the mountain. But in terms of understanding the situation of the evil cult in our sect, there's no one better than him. Perfected Idol Month smiled and said, I also thought of this, so, of course if you think that he is in closed-door cultivation and it will affect his progress, it's not good for me? Absolutely not. Dukan Jinren immediately opened his mouth and said resolutely and decisively, Senior Martial Brother, I'm not an old fool. This is a chance that Senior Martial Brother is giving him, allowing him to come out of closed-door cultivation in advance. And the aristocratic families in Kunwa City can't say anything in front of the threat of the evil cult. We, master and disciple, will always remember this kindness in our hearts. Perfected Idol Month smiled and seemed to be a bit emotional. She said, It's good that you know. All these years, there have always been people who are dissatisfied with my position as the sect head. They always say that when my master retired to the Winter Peak, the position of sect head should have been passed on to Martial Uncle Tianlan. Junior martial brothers like Qiandeng and Mingzhu also have ambiguous attitudes towards this. Only you, who have been in charge of the Heavenly Soldier Hall for many years, have always firmly stood on my side. Dukan Jinren sneered and said, Senior martial brother, don't be angry. Who doesn't know what those people are thinking? They just want to take the opportunity to suppress us so that they can occupy more things on the strange peak in the sky. Ridiculous. What's more, when the position was passed on, we were all standing in this Jingyang Hall. Even Martial Uncle Tianlan hasn't said anything yet. Since when did they have the right to complain? He cupped his hands and said seriously, Senior martial brother, don't worry. Those clowns definitely can't overturn the sky. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, Martial Uncle Bai Chen is still on the Winter Peak. I don't think they dare to act recklessly. I'll call He over to greet Senior Martial Brother now. If you have any instructions, just tell me. I'll ask that kid to do his best to help you catch this evildoer of the evil cult hiding in the dark. He definitely won't let Senior Martial Brother down. Immortal Idol Month nodded with a smile and said, That's good. Dukan Jinren turned around and left. He walked vigorously and was obviously very happy. For a person of his cultivation and temperament, this was also rare. However, from this, it could be seen that Dukan Jinren really liked his disciple He from the bottom of his heart and had deep expectations for him. Encountering this kind of thing, he seemed to be happier than encountering a happy event. Immortal Idol Month watched Dukan Jinren leave. He was the only one left in the huge Xingyang hall. He turned around and sat silently for a while. Suddenly, he sighed softly and his face showed some inexplicable tiredness. With his master, who was a perfected lord of Huashan sect, still alive and he was sitting in the position of sect leader, those people still dared to make irresponsible remarks from time to time. Did they really have the guts? With just a few perfected masters in the Yuanying realm? Immortal Idol Month smiled bitterly and his face gradually became heavy. He was afraid that those people had someone backing them up. In the fragrant garden, the competition to plant the eagle fruit tree was disrupted by this sudden murder. Not to mention the others, even the leader, Melaleuca japonica and the two Jindan friar Lin Xing, had not returned for a few days. The remaining odd-job disciples looked at each other and did not know what to do. However, life still had to go on. In these days when all kinds of rumors were spreading wildly, everyone still came to the spiritual field as usual. Although they did not know if the competition could continue, they still had to do their work. It was just that some people slacked, some worked more and some seemed to be especially serious. This person who was especially diligent and serious was Lu Qin. Every day when it was time for him to work, he did not slack off and honestly did all the things that he had to do. When he was free, he would gather with the others on the ridge of the fields and discuss the ups and downs of the past few days in a lively manner. He talked about that unfortunate person who died a violent death and together they imagined that if it was really the evil cult's doing, what kind of legendary evildoers would be like and so on and so forth. Everyone did not have much opinion of the gentle and polite Lu Qin. Some even kindly reminded him not to waste his effort. Seeing that the two uncle masters Yan and Lin had not returned for a few days, this matter was probably going to be ruined. Even if it was not ruined, they would at least have to compete again when the time came. Otherwise, if they were not here for the past few days, who could tell if there was anything fishy? Lu Qin smiled and did not say anything. He nodded in agreement, but he still did what he had to do, and the others did not bother to criticize him. After another 2 days, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Xing returned to the grass garden. It seemed that the sect had other arrangements for the two of them after hearing about the murder case. But even though they were back, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Xing did not look too good, and they seemed to be in a bad mood. Then, as most people expected, they directly ignored the results of the few days of absence and announced to the crowd that the competition was invalid. They would organize another competition in a few days, and then try to pick out a suitable candidate. In the crowd, Lu Qin was silent, but the people around him were all smiling. Occasionally, some of Lu Qin's peers would come over to tease him, pat him on the shoulder, and then earnestly teach Lu Qin things like, "If you don't listen to your elders, you will suffer." Lu Qin also smiled bitterly and then nodded, saying that everyone was right, that he really did not understand this principle, and that he had to focus on his cultivation in the future. In short, this matter seemed to be over for the time being. However, 1 day later, there was a sudden change that no one expected. Melaleuca japonica and Lin Xing once again gathered the crowd, and then with a complicated expression, they announced to everyone that there would be no more competitions in the future. This time, the candidate had been selected to work for the most popular genius of the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. The person who would grow the eagle fruit tree for her was called Lu Qin. The crowd was in an uproar, and when they looked over, even Lu Qin was dumbfounded, as if he did not know what was going on, and had a puzzled look on his face. The crowd surrounded the two Jindan friar and kept asking questions, and then Melaleuca japonica calmly said that it did not matter who said it, because it was Su Qingjun who had directly selected the candidate. The crowd was shocked and even more confused and everyone kept talking at once. Melaleuca japonica, on the other hand, looked at Lu Qin from afar with a meaningful look in her eyes, and a playful smile appeared on her lips. Chapter 143. So what do I say? Are you going to thank me? After knocking on Lu Qin's door and walking in, EXN leaned against the table with a smug look on her face, giggling as she spoke to Lu Qin. Lu Qin nodded repeatedly and said with a straight face, "Of course, it's all thanks to Miss Yi's sharp eyes that I had this opportunity." EXN looked even happier. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said proudly, "It can't be helped, I'm just so smart. That day I ran into Sister Su on the road. Although I only spoke a few words to her, I could tell from her words that she was very concerned about the eagle fruits. So I thought, if I don't care about other people's matters, how could she not care about herself? Since Martial Aunt Yen and Martial Aunt Lin aren't around, she'll definitely go and take a look herself, right?" Lu Qin nodded repeatedly, yes, 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 as if he had suddenly seen the light. You're really too smart, too quick-witted. EXN sighed, a pained expression on her face as she said, it's a pity that the others all think they're so smart. Whenever there's a chance they'll slack off. Sister Sue is secretly watching from the side, so of course she won't like it. So, looking at your diligent appearance and the fact that you've cultivated the eagle fruits well, it'd be strange if she didn't choose you. So, she said to Lu Qin in a serious tone, Brother Lu, in the future, you should remember this lesson. Don't be reckless, don't be lazy. Okay, I'll remember it all. Whatever you say is right. Lu Qin chuckled, as if no matter what EXIN said, he would listen with infinite patience. So much so that EXIN herself was a little embarrassed from bragging. She blushed and glared at him. Whatever did I help you this time? EXIN asked. You've been a great help, Lu Qin said. EXN stretched out her hand and said with a smile, then why don't you give me some benefits? Hand it over quickly. How about I devote myself to you? What? EXIN was startled. She blushed and said, Hey Brother Lu, you're not being serious again. What are you talking about? Lu Qin laughed and waved his hand. I'm just kidding. How can you joke around like this all the time? When we first met in the land of chaos, you even asked me to marry you. You're too shameless. Lu Qin laughed and said, I asked you to repay me with your body, but you're not willing. If it's my turn to repay you with my body, you're still not willing. Wow, you're too difficult to talk to. Hey, can't you talk nicely, Brother Lu? EXN looked like she was about to jump on the table in anger. Her face was red and even her eyes were watery. Lu Qin shrugged and pulled her to sit down. Then he said with a smile, Okay, let's not joke around. I'm more than 10 years older than you. I can't bully a little girl like you. Oh, but speaking of gifts, I really don't know what to give you. EXN suddenly raised her head and looked at him. Lu Qin didn't notice. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then he said, How about this? I don't have anything good with me now. When you find a suitable husband in the future, on the day of your wedding, I'll give you the best gift, okay? On the day of my wedding? EXN still looked a little shy, but her eyes were bright and clear, like gentle water ripples, flickering with beautiful, ever-changing, sparkling glimmers as she asked softly. Lu Qin said with a smile, Yes. EXN looked at him for a while. Then she suddenly giggled and said, Okay, but you said it yourself. You must want the best thing, the best gift. Lu Qin stretched out his hand and said with a smile, A gentleman's word. EXN nodded her head heavily. She also extended her fair palm and clapped it on his palm. With a clear and melodious sound she said loudly, It's a promise. Their palms touched for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of an unusual softness in their palms. Lu Qin withdrew his hand and walked to the side of the bed to sit down. As if he suddenly thought of something, he said to himself, Let me think, I can't be considered a gentleman. Hey! EXIN jumped 8 feet high. She rushed over and pushed him down angrily. Lu Qin fell on the bed and laughed. EXIN found it funny and angry at the same time. She stretched out her hand and hit him a few times. She said angrily, You're too bad, too bad. You just made a promise and you want to renege on it? You're too bad. The sky was clear and bright and the world was clear and bright. The majestic Kunlun mountain range stood on the earth. It was like a majestic giant. In its embrace there were countless living beings. It also hid unknown darkness and shadows. When the warm sunlight fell on the house, everything looked so quiet and peaceful. There was almost no one around. Therefore, the sound of footsteps that broke the silence was unusually clear and loud. 2 people came. They were Dukan Jinren and his disciple, He. There were disciples guarding a place about 10 feet away from the house. However, after He handed over Immortal Idol Month's letter, they quickly stepped aside. Several gazes fell on He's face. It seemed that they were more interested in this young man than the respected Dukan Jinren. He's face was somewhat similar to his younger brother, He Gang. Of course, that was before He Gang's face was disfigured. They hadn't seen each other for many days. Perhaps it was because he had been in seclusion in the cave for a long time without seeing the sun. He's face looked a little pale. However, other than that, he was full of spirit and energy. His expression was calm. It seemed that he had not been affected by that incident at all. When they walked to the door of the house, Dukan Jinren stopped. He, who had been half a step behind him, also stopped. There was no one around. Dukan Jinren looked at his disciple. His eyes finally showed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, Actually, when I agreed to sect leader senior brother's request, I was still a little worried for you. However, this opportunity was too rare for you. I could only snatch it first. He's face showed a trace of gratitude. He lowered his head and said softly, Master's kindness is too great. It's really hard for this disciple to repay you. However, seeing you like this, I am also relieved. Dukan Jinren didn't care. He smiled and said, I was worried that the incident would be too big of a blow to you. It would affect your temperament and confuse your cultivation. Now, it seems that not only have you not been affected, but you have also made progress. You should be only one step away from breaking through the Jindan realm, right? He smiled. His face was calm and determined. He didn't say anything. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, You are right. You have not achieved your potential yet. You should hide and endure. If you can use this setback as a sharpening, it will be very beneficial to your cultivation in the future. As he spoke, he seemed to think of something. He smiled faintly and said, Now, everyone in the sect thinks that Su Qingjun is a genius. I don't think so. In the future, her achievements may not be able to surpass yours. Even with He Yi's calm temperament, he was shocked when he heard this. He said, Master, what do you mean? Su Qingjun has her own talent. She is indeed powerful. However, the reason why she can break through the Jindan realm so early is that the Su family and her master, Mu Yuan, have been sparing no effort to accumulate all kinds of spiritual materials and resources. This is also an important reason. The Su family hopes that there will be another Yuanying Jinren in their family. For this, they can do anything. As far as I know, her master, Mu Yuan, has an even greater ambition. Greater ambition than Yuanying Jinren? He Yi's expression changed slightly. He said softly, You mean Martial Uncle Mu Yuan wants junior sister Su to become a perfected cultivator? Of course. Dukan Jinren sneered and said, Mu Yuan is the leader of the Iron Branch of our sect. He has long been dissatisfied with the decline of the Iron Branch for many years. However, with his ability, how can he shake the Kuanji? After all, there are two perfected cultivators by Chen and Tianlan in the Kuanji. Therefore, if the Iron Branch wants to prosper, the only hope is for a peerless genius to rise up and become a perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm. In this way there will naturally be a storm and a meteoric rise. He was silent. After a moment he nodded and said, Master is right. It's no wonder that Shirbua Kihara takes good care of junior sister Su. I heard that he is extremely demanding in his cultivation. He doesn't allow any mistakes and doesn't allow any regrets. At this point, he also smiled and said, It must be hard for junior sister Su to cultivate under such heavy pressure and bravely advance all the way to where she is today. Dao Master Du Kong smiled mischievously. There was a look of disapproval on his face as he said, It's still too early. Let's wait and watch the show. He paused for a moment, then looked at He Yi and said, In short, the path of cultivation is long and dangerous. You still have a long way to go. Xiao Yi, you have talent, but in the future you must be able to calm your heart and cultivate in peace. Only then will you be able to achieve great things. He took a step back and bowed deeply to Dukan Jinren. He said in a low voice, I will remember Master's teachings. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, That's all. Just remember it. Let's go in. He said, Yes. He stepped forward and prepared to push the door. Dukan Jinren said, This matter is related to the evil faction. It is of great importance. Sect head Shixiang attaches great importance to it. You must investigate carefully and try to catch the murderer as soon as possible. Find out the truth. He said, Yes, disciple understands. With a creaking sound, the two doors were pushed open by his hands. A gloomy aura gushed out from the room. It seemed that the light from the outside could not penetrate the room for a while, but a strange and unpleasant smell wafted out. He was about to walk in when he suddenly heard Dukan Jinren sneer behind him. He turned his head and said, Master, what's wrong? Dukan Jinren said, Nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. I can't help but laugh at Mu Yuan's wishful thinking. What is it? Perfected Dukong said leisurely, Mu Yuan has great ambitions. He did everything he could to help his disciple attain golden core, even earlier than the two perfected lords by Chen and Tianlan. Everyone in Kunlun thinks that he's a peerless genius. But he only cares about being happy. He did not think about whether the two powerful peerless Jinren of Kunlun are happy about their Tieji's method or not. With that, Dukan Jinren laughed alone. He stood at the side and looked at the house not far away. Looking at the deep darkness inside, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Chapter 144. The wind blew from afar, blew into this enclosed house, and then the sunlight shone down, everything seemed to become gentle and warm, dispelling the darkness and coldness that was once hidden here. Yi and Dukan Jinren walked into the house. There was a strange aura in this room. It carried a lingering fishy smell. Dao Master Du Kong stopped at the doorstep for a moment. He frowned and waved his hand in front of him. What's this smell? Why is it so strong? In contrast, he did not have too obvious reaction. He quickly walked forward and opened the window. As the light shone in, the scene in the house was immediately revealed before their eyes. Bright red. This was the first shocking scene that they saw. The white walls of the house and the floor were covered in a blood-red color, as if countless people's blood had been splashed on them. It was a ghastly sight. Moreover, it seemed as if the blood of countless people had been deliberately painted on them, forming a complicated and incomprehensible pattern. He looked at the bloody patterns on the wall, his pupils slightly contracted, then turned his head, looked into the house bit by bit, and finally landed on the ground in the middle of the house. There was an empty space. Looking at the curved length, it seemed to be a human shape. He turned and glanced at Dukan Jinren. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, "He died there." He squatted down, looked at the finger-thick cracks on the ground. In the cracks, there were still many remnants of bright red, just that many places had already dried, looked like blackened blood stains. "How is it? Did you see anything?" Dukan Jinren asked behind him. He looked somewhat solemn, frowned, and after a moment of silence said, "The blood pattern formation in this house is called reincarnation formation. It is an extremely high-level formation in the evil sect. Ordinary disciples are unable to set it." His finger lightly brushed past the edge of a crack on the ground. It was unusually not rough, and at a glance almost all the cracks, thicknesses, and sizes were exactly the same. One could imagine what a horrifying scene it would be if there were countless amounts of fresh blood flowing through these cracks. Let's not talk about the cultivation level of the person who set up this formation, but this technique is extremely authentic. Hi's voice sounded a little low, but his eyes were unusually bright and sharp, as if two balls of fire were burning in them. The array patterns, the positions, the angles, the spiritual energy, the 8 gates of life and death, the Tao of reincarnation, and all the important parts of the reincarnation array, he set them up perfectly. Dukan Jinren walked to his side and said in a low voice, "You mean?" He coldly said, "There is no way to fake this kind of formation. It must be the work of a core member of the evil cult. Moreover, his position must be extremely high. Only then can he have such a skillful and authentic method." Dukan Jinren took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, I will immediately go back and report this matter to Sect Head Senior Brother. Xiaoyi, I will leave this matter to you. I will also leave Sect Head Senior Brother's warrant with you. If necessary, you can deploy some of our Kunlun party's hidden resources. At the same time, with this warrant, no one below Jin Dan Friar can refuse to answer your questions." "What if it is a Yuanying realm Shirshu or Shirbua?" he suddenly asked. Dukan Jinren's expression changed slightly. He looked at He and said, "What do you mean by this?" He's expression did not change. He only said softly, "I just want to be safe, so I asked first." Dukan Jinren seemed to be hesitant about this question. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Yuanying Jinren's side is indeed not easy to handle. But this matter involves the evil cult. The responsibility is huge. Let's do it this way. If you really need to ask any Yuanying Jinren, it's better to report to Sect Head Senior Brother first. Let him decide and summon them. Otherwise, your way of doing things is really too easy to offend people." He nodded and said, "Thank you, Master, for your understanding." Dukan Jinren sighed. He took another look at the bloody scene in the room. He could not help but cursed in a low voice. He then turned around and left. He did not leave with his master. From this moment onwards, his biggest mission was to start tracking down that mysterious evil cult member. He slowly walked to the white wall. He carefully looked at those blood-colored patterns. He then leaned forward and sniffed. Then he used his hand to lightly rub on a red mark. It was indeed cinnabar. Hi's eyes revealed a look of understanding. But then a trace of deep worry flashed past. The evil cult had been on the decline for many years. He had not heard of such a person for a long time. Could it be that a demon from the evil cult who had been living in seclusion for many years had suddenly appeared? But if it was that kind of demon, why would he make a move on He Changxing, such an unremarkable person who was not even an official disciple? And even set up such a terrifying reincarnation formation? Was it worth it? Was it not worth it? He stood in the room with his brows tightly furrowed. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. He slowly turned around and looked at the blood-red color that was almost everywhere around him. At a certain moment he seemed to have a strange illusion. It was as if he was surrounded by a dense blood-red fog that surrounded him. And in the depths of the fog there must be a huge secret. He slowly closed his eyes. Standing in this silent and lonely blood-red room, there seemed to be soundless waves around him. But he did not seem to feel it. He only softly muttered to himself. "Who are you? What do you want to do?" Lu Qin left the fragrance garden. Under the envious gaze of many people, he went to Su Qingjuan's cave abode. As the most prominent young genius of the Kunlun party, the newly promoted Jin Dan, and Su Qingjun, who had a strong background, naturally lived in an extraordinary place. It was on a Ziyun peak that was filled with spiritual power. Halfway up the mountain, there was a large cave abode that was opened up in the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the situation where the servant disciples lived in groups, there were only 4 caves on the entire Ziyun peak. And on the side of the Flying Goose platform, there was only Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Looking from afar, one could see the immortal's qi rising and the clouds rolling down the cliff. Ancient trees and old vines could be seen everywhere. In the distance, there were cries of apes and birds nearby. It could be said to be an immortal's paradise. It was the immortal's cave abode that every cultivator in the world dreamed of. Standing on the Flying Goose platform, Lu Qin was also a little emotional and dazed. He did not speak for a long time. "Are you stunned?" A sweet voice came from the side. It was Xian. Lu Qin sighed and said, "Yes, this person is too different from other people." It was rare that Xian did not argue with him. Looking at the picturesque scenery in front of her, a look of envy appeared on her face. She said, "Indeed, when I came here for the first time I was also stunned." As she spoke, Xian shrugged and said to Lu Qin, "Come, I'll bring you there." That day, Su Qingjun had something to do and was not in the cave abode. However, everything had already been discussed by everyone. Xian only brought Lu Qin here to familiarize himself with the way. When Su Qingjun returned later, she would naturally talk to Lu Qin. According to the previous arrangement, the person who cultivated fresh eagle fruits for Su Qingjun would follow Su Qingjun and live in her cave abode for a period of time. However, in reality, it wasn't quite accurate to say that they were in a cave abode. Generally speaking, the entire Soaring Goose Terrace was actually within the range of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Walking on it meant that they were in her cave abode. However, the cave abode where Su Qingjun usually lived and cultivated referred to the wide stone cave that was opened on the side of the mountain wall of the Flying Goose platform. Usually the cave door was closed and outsiders could not enter. The place where Lu Qin was going to stay was a mountain forest more than 100 feet away from the cave door. There was a spiritual field here, which was full of spiritual power and fertile land. Bai Chao Tang had also transplanted the 7 best eagle fruit trees here. In the following time, Lu Qin's task was to take care of these eagle fruit trees. Once the eagle fruit was found to be ripe, he must immediately inform Su Qingjun in the cave abode and let her eat it as soon as possible. Then, the medicine would circulate through all the meridians in her body without any loss. From then on, she would achieve the perfect Jindan state. However, at this time, Lu Qin was frowning and staring blankly at the side of the spiritual field. It was obviously a newly built hut. "Am I going to live here?" he asked Xian. Xian glared at him and said angrily, "Isn't that nonsense? Do you really want to live in the cave abode over there?" Lu Qin shook his head and said with emotion, "Not really. But isn't it too shabby to prepare a hut for me?" "Hey, you're just a servant disciple. Don't talk as if you're already Jin Dan Friar, okay?" Lu Qin laughed and said, "You girl, your mouth is so poisonous. Be careful that no one will dare to want you in the future." "Bah. None of your business." Xian snorted and then walked over to open the door of the hut. She took a look inside and then turned back with a smile. "Brother Lu, it looks not bad." Lu Qin smiled and walked over. He stood in the hut and looked around. The hut was neither big nor small. There was a bed and a table inside. Could be considered simple and plain. "Anyway, I'll make do," he said with a smile. "I don't ask for too much for the workers." Xian laughed and walked to the door again. She said, "Brother Lu, your hut is more than 10 feet away from the door of Sister Sue's cave abode. When the eagle fruit ripens, will you make it in time to call her?" "I'll make it in time," Lu Qin said carelessly. "As long as it doesn't exceed 10 minutes, the primitive spiritual energy of the eagle fruit won't dissipate. It doesn't matter. Of course, unless she leaves here and isn't in the cave abode. If that's the case, I can't do anything no matter how capable I am." Xian said with a smile, "Don't worry about this. I heard from Marshal Uncle Yen that he has discussed it with Sister Sue. She will only do this during this period of time. Unless something big happens, she won't leave the cave abode. Lu Qin narrowed his eyes and then nodded with a smile. That's good. Chapter 145. Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace abode on Purple Cloud Peak in the afternoon. By this time Exin had already left. Lu Qin put down his luggage, tidied up the hut, and went to work in the spirit field outside the hut. The spirit field was about 2 acres in size. The 7 eagle fruit trees were transplanted here, spaced very loosely between each other. This was also to provide these precious spirit materials with sufficient spirit energy and nutrition. Lu Qin carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees one by one. After he had an idea, he chose a few trees that looked the most likely to bear fruit first and cultivated them. When he was tired, he sat down on the embankment to rest. Looking at the hut on the other side, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He muttered to himself, "After living in a hut for so long, I finally managed to live in a brick house, and now I'm living in a hut. I'm really regressing." "What do you mean regressing?" A clear and melodious voice came from behind him. Lu Qin turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing on the embankment not far away. She was looking at him. Lu Qin laughed and stood up. "I was just joking. It's fine." Su Qingjun didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at Lu Qin seriously and said, "Lu Qin, the eagle fruit tree is very important to my cultivation. I don't want anything to go wrong." Lu Qin was stunned. He seemed to have never expected that Su Qingjun would actually attach such importance to this matter, so he straightened his expression and said, "Don't worry, senior sister Su. I fought hard for this matter, so I naturally have to do a good job. I absolutely won't be perfunctory or overlook it." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "That's good." After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something again. He hesitated for a moment, looked at Lu Qin and said, "In addition, if you do this well for me, I will definitely reward you handsomely. Moreover, it will definitely be much better than the usual practice in Liuxiang Garden. In short, I will definitely not let you go back to where you were before. You can rest assured about this." A rare trace of embarrassment flashed across Lu Qin's face. He smiled bitterly and said, "Then I thank you very much." Su Qingjun nodded to him, then turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But at this time, Lu Qin suddenly called out to her, saying, "Shiji Su, I'm sure you know this eagle fruit's character. I'll take good care of it, and once it's ripe I'll call you. But since I want to do this well, I still have to discuss it with you face to face. During this period of time, you can't leave the cave at will." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Of course. I've left the mountain early recently to deal with some chores. For the next 20 days I'll be staying in the cave residence to meditate. You can rest assured." Lu Qin grinned and said, "Okay." Su Qingjun glanced at him, turned around with an indifferent expression, and walked towards the cave residence in the distance. And Lu Qin sat down again on the ridge of the field, looked at the spiritual field in front of him, and then looked at the blue sky above his head. Seeing the blue sky and white clouds as clear as a wash, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He laughed softly and said, I've made a name for myself in farming? If there's day, there's night, and if there's light, there's darkness." When Lu Qin stood under the clear and bright sky, sighing with emotion on the fairyland-like flying goose platform, feeling that there were still some bright and beautiful things in life, in another place in the Kunlun Mountains, he who was walking on the mountain road, felt a trace of coldness in his heart. He always felt that the place in front of him was a little dark. The Kunlun Mountains were very large and most of the places were bright and spacious. Just like the famous sect, the Kunlun Party, it was full of righteousness and awe-inspiring momentum. But such a large cultivation sect, of course, it was impossible for everything to be as it seemed on the surface. At least in the eyes of the mountain he was heading to at the moment, the place hidden in the shadows behind the mountain peak, was dark and cold. Even though it was daytime and the sun was hanging high in the sky, the feeling it gave people still hadn't changed. The mountain was Nameless Mountain. For many years it didn't have a name. It seemed that no one was willing to waste their brains to give this damn place a name. So after a long time, Nameless Mountain actually became the official name of this mountain. Nameless Mountain was a small mountain hidden in the Kunlun Mountains. It was surrounded by tall mountain ridges, so most of the light was blocked by the high mountains. This small mountain was dark, cold, lonely, and cold. It had never been liked by people. In the shadow of Nameless Mountain, in an even darker corner, there was a house that looked like an ancestral hall. Righteous grave. He looked at the house that seemed very dark even in the daytime, and slowly read the words on the plaque hanging above the door. A grave was a grave, a place to take in the corpses of the dead. But in the Kunlun Mountains, not all the cultivators of the Kunlun party would come here after they passed away. 4 cultivators with profound cultivation such as Jinjuan, Jinren, Jin Dan, and Foundation Establishment, the Kunlun party would naturally have a beautiful cemetery to bury them. They would enjoy the incense offerings of the younger generation day and night. During festivals, it would be incomparably lively. It was like a completely different world from the righteous grave. This dark and cold place took in some lonely and wild ghosts. It took in some people who couldn't enter the bright cemetery of the majestic Kunlun. He Changxing's corpse was placed here. Of course, it was reasonable to say that if they really wanted to investigate properly, this corpse should not have been moved. But even if the Kunlun party's methods were powerful, they still couldn't keep a corpse in a place where people gathered for a long time. In addition, He Changxing had lived his entire life in obscurity and died without a sound. Of course, he couldn't enter the Kunlun cemetery, so he could only be placed here in the righteous grave. The gate of the righteous grave was painted black. In this dark shadow of the mountain, it seemed particularly thick and heavy, but it also gave off a somewhat gloomy feeling. He stood outside the gate and gently exhaled. This was also his first time here. Normally, almost no disciple of the Kunlun party would be willing to come here. He walked forward and knocked twice on the gate of the righteous grave. His low and deep voice spread out, but behind the gate was silence. There was no response. He furrowed his brows and used all his strength to knock a few more times. This time the sound was even louder than before. However, in this silence, the sound that suddenly sounded was like an abrupt howl that made people's hearts tremble. After a moment, the sound of footsteps came from behind the gate. It slowly approached and then opened the black gate. A thin and old face peeked out from the gap of the gate. For a moment he couldn't clearly see how old this man was. However, what gave him the deepest impression was the eyes of this old man who guarded the righteous grave. There was almost no light in those eyes. There was only numbness and dullness, as if he had reached the final juncture of his life and was about to run out of oil. What's the matter? That pair of cold and numb eyes fell on He's face. Perhaps it was the gloomy atmosphere and dark aura behind him that made He subconsciously shiver. However, he was after all a cultivator with profound cultivation and outstanding talent. He quickly calmed down and then handed over a warrant from his bosom. My name is He. Under the orders of the sect leader, I am here to inspect He Changxing's corpse that was delivered here a few days ago. This corpse watcher did not reach out to receive it. He only glanced down and then looked at He. After a moment of silence, he slowly pushed open the half door and said in a hoarse voice, "Come in." Seeing this corpse watcher move aside, He hesitated for a moment and then stepped into the righteous grave. The moment he stepped over the threshold, he seemed to have a feeling that the sky had suddenly turned darker. Most of the houses in this righteous grave were painted black. A row of more than 10 coffins were placed side by side under one of the walls of this courtyard. On the other side there were many rooms in front and behind. Some of the rooms looked pitch black while some of the rooms were lit up with specks of candlelight, emitting a faint light. As if he saw the doubt in He's eyes, the corpse watcher slowly walked past him and said in a low voice, "Those with candlelight are those who have just died. The road to the netherworld is long and hard to walk in the dark. There must be some light to make it easier to walk." He's expression changed slightly. He suddenly asked again, "What about those dark houses?" The corpse watcher turned his head somewhat woodenly and glanced at him. That pair of eyes seemed to have only a turbid haze and numbness. He said, "Those have been dead for a long time. Even their souls have gone far away." He stared at this corpse watcher, his pupils slightly contracted. Before today he knew about this place called the Righteous Grave, but he had never been here before. Naturally, he would not know that this place was so gloomy and terrifying, and that there was such a ghastly corpse watcher. If he had not confirmed that he was indeed in the Kunlun Mountains and this righteous grave was indeed the Kunlun party's territory, he would have even thought that this person before him was some kind of evil demon. He even felt that those vicious and evil evildoers from the evil sect that he had met before, in terms of gloomy aura, they were not even comparable to this corpse watcher before him. However, since the Kunlun party could allow this person to guard the righteous grave here, he should not really be some kind of demon. Perhaps this kind of place was really too rich in energy. After staying here for a long time, it would naturally become strange. Thinking of this, he felt some sympathy for this corpse watcher. However, he had always been a strong-willed person. After he nodded to the corpse watcher, he said, "Where is He Changxing's body placed?" The corpse watcher raised his hand and pointed to a certain place in the courtyard. Yi looked at his movement. Not only was it slow, it was also abnormally stiff. He did not know whether it was like a human or a ghost. He could not help but ask, "What happened to your hand?" The corpse watcher was silent for a moment and said, "It's fake." Yi was startled. He took a closer look and indeed found that although the corpse watcher's hand looked no different from a normal person's, it was actually carved from a wooden block. This made him a little embarrassed. He took a deep breath and bowed his head slightly. He said, "I'm sorry." The corpse watcher's expression changed a little. He seemed to be a little surprised. After he took another look at Yi, his stiff gaze seemed to have softened a little. Then his voice rang out again. He said, "In that room." Yi looked in the direction he was pointing. He saw a dark room at the end of the courtyard. There were a few flickering candlelight inside. He nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance, sir." Having said that, he stepped towards that direction. However, he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard the corpse watcher behind him say, "Hey, do you want to know how that person died?" Yi's body shook violently. He suddenly turned around. His eyes shone brightly. Chapter 146. Nameless Mountain's shadow was heavy, as if even the sun hated this place, and there was rarely any time for light to shine down. In this dark courtyard, amidst the eerie atmosphere, the corpse watcher's sudden words made Yi feel incredulous all of a sudden. "You know?" He stared at the withered, shriveled face and said in a low voice. The zombie widened his mouth and let out a chuckle that sounded like a chuckle. However, his face didn't seem to be smiling at all. Even when he chuckled, the muscles beside his mouth twitched a little, making him look extremely stiff. He even felt that a person who had just died would be more pleasing to the eye than this corpse watcher, because he looked more like a dead person than a dead person. The aura of death that was so thick that it could not be dispersed seemed to be emanating from his body at all times. After hearing Yi's question, the corpse watcher smiled strangely and said in a hoarse voice, "I have a condition." "What condition?" "I want to see someone. Find him for me." "Who is it?" "Dongfang Tao." "Dongfang Tao." Yi was stunned for a while before he suddenly reacted. "Oh, the one from Baichaotang?" "That's right." Yi furrowed his brows and looked at the corpse watcher. "Why are you looking for him?" The corpse watcher was expressionless, looking like a lonely wild ghost standing in the dark courtyard. He said softly, "This has nothing to do with you." Yi was quiet for a moment, but then he shook his head and said, "I might not be able to do it. First, I'm not familiar with that master uncle Dongfang, and we haven't been friends in the past. Now, we might even become enemies. Secondly, according to what I know, he has been in closed-door training for a long time due to his severe injuries. Until now, there are no signs of him coming out. Even his favorite disciple could not formally acknowledge him as her master. So, I don't think I can do anything about it." The corpse turned around and said coldly, "Then forget it. I've said what I want to say. It's up to you whether you want to do it or not." Yi suddenly took a step forward. His eyes flashed as he said, "I have the sect leader's warrant in my hand. Is that not enough to make you speak the truth?" The corpse watcher did not turn around and said, "The warrant only allows you to enter this courtyard. If you want to suppress me, you're not qualified. Why don't you ask Reverend Idlemonth to come to me directly?" Yi was speechless. Of course, he could not really summon Reverend Idlemonth to this dark place. As the head of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idlemonth had many things to do every day. Moreover, this matter was handed to Yi by the old man. Yi did not want to be. He took a deep look at the corpse watcher and said, "Of course the sect master won't come here, but I promise you that sooner or later, I will help you call Martial Uncle Dongfang. But whether it will succeed or not, I cannot guarantee." The corpse watcher did not seem to be moved. He waved his hand and said coldly, "Before I see Dongfang Tao, I have nothing to say to you." After saying that, he walked away on his own. Soon he walked to the other side of the courtyard. In the darkness, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. Yi took a deep breath. His expression changed several times. In the end, he decided to put this sudden interlude aside. He turned around and walked into the dark room with flickering candlelight. The eagle fruit tree liked light and moisture. It also liked to be nourished by abundant spiritual energy. It was a very delicate spiritual plant. It was not easy to raise. Because of its special properties, it was not easy to pick. It could be said to be a very troublesome plant. Lu Qin came to the Flying Goose Terrace. Basically, he lived and ate at the side of the spiritual field. He took care of the eagle fruit tree here. It could be considered as adding firewood to Su Qingjuan's exciting and dazzling cultivation career. Unfortunately, the eagle fruit tree liked sunlight. It never ripened at night. This allowed Lu Qin to at least sleep peacefully at night. Otherwise, not even a deity would be able to bear it if he could not rest all day long. On the first day he came here, Su Qingjun came to the side of the spiritual field to talk to him. Then she went back to her cave abode. He did not see her come out again that day. Lu Qin knew that Su Qingjun had a reputation for being obsessed with cultivation. Therefore he was not surprised. He worked in the spiritual field until dusk. Then he finished his work for the day. When the sun was about to set, Lu Qin walked to the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace. He looked into the distance and saw a sea of clouds. The sun had mostly fallen below the horizon. The remaining light plated the clouds with a layer of golden color. It was like a brilliant golden ocean. It was extraordinarily beautiful. The mountain wind blew in his face and his clothes fluttered. When he looked up at the sky from the cliff, he would feel a sense of relief. It was as if nothing in the world was important anymore. It was as if he was floating in the air. Perhaps, this was the mentality of cultivation? Or perhaps, it was precisely because of this that the ancient deities and virtuous deities of the past countless generations liked to stay in the heavenly abodes of the famous mountains and great rivers, watching the changes of the white clouds and the changing of the stars, and thus comprehending the real great Tao. Lu Qin looked at the blue sky in the distance and was lost in thought. The path he walked seemed to be different from everyone else in the world. Even if he saw the scenery of heaven and earth and the sea of clouds, he still could not understand the Tao that belonged to him, the path that belonged to him. The next morning, Lu Qin woke up early and went to the spiritual field to take a look. After one night, the 7 eagle fruit trees did not look any different from the day before. Some of the fruits hanging on the branches were still green and did not show any signs of ripening. It should be a few more days. After Lu Qin looked at it, he had an idea in his heart. He took the wooden bucket to the spring in the mountains and fetched 2 large buckets of clear spring water. First, he watered them, then he used his spiritual power to cultivate the trees. After this work, it was noon in the blink of an eye. He could finally take a breather. Lu Qin walked to the edge of the field and sat down. He glanced at the cave. This morning, Su Qingjun still did not come out of the cave. It seemed that this beautiful girl had made up her mind to stay in the cave and wait for Lu Qin to run over and call for her. Lu Qin smiled. He did not have any other grievances. After all, this was what they had agreed to do. He was sitting, calculating in his heart that at this moment in the Kunlun sect at the foot of the mountain, the news about He Changxing should have already spread. Most of the ordinary disciples might just be watching the fun, but if there was really a spy from the devil cult, it would be impossible for them to be indifferent to the reincarnation formation. Perhaps there would be some reaction? He squinted his eyes and thought quietly. Then he looked up at the sky and decided that tonight when it was quiet, maybe he should sneak down the mountain to take a look. Just as he was deep in thought, the quiet Fian platform suddenly heard a rush of footsteps from afar. Lu Qin was shocked. He turned his head and saw a man walking quickly up the mountain, heading straight for the door of the cave on the Fian platform. The spiritual field where Lu Qin was at was opened up at the side of the Fian platform. There were many ancient trees and rocks around it. Most of the area was hidden. In addition, the place was remote. If one did not look carefully, it would not be easy to notice this place. The man who came in a hurry obviously didn't notice that there was a spirit field 100 feet away from the cave residence. There was also a man standing there. Looking at his anxious expression, he ran to the gate and began to knock on the door. Bang 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 bang. The knocking sound was deep and clear, but it wasn't too loud. This was because the door of Su Qingjuan's residence was different from the houses at the foot of the mountain. It wasn't a wooden door but a stone door that had been enchanted with a spell. A golden core cultivator, or rather, a young genius that everyone looked up to coupled with a wealthy family background, was just that different from the masses. Lu Qin touched his chest pocket. There was a yellow stone talisman there. Su Qingjun had given it to him when they met yesterday. Its function was very simple. He could use this stone talisman to easily contact Su Qingjun. In her words, the stone door was thick and heavy, but the cave inside was big and deep. If someone was really looking for it, it would not be easy to hear them just by knocking on the door. Seeing that the man used all his strength to knock on the stone door for a long time, but there seemed to be no response from inside the cave, Lu Qin suddenly became happy. He felt a strange sense of superiority that made him despise the man who was still foolishly knocking on the door. Although he knew that this feeling was very boring, he could not help but laugh. He did not have the idea of running over to help. On the contrary, he even took 2 steps back and sat down with his back against the trunk of an eagle fruit tree. He did not mind the dirt on the ground. After all, he had been rolling here for the whole morning. He watched from afar as the man became more and more distressed, and his smile became more and more joyful. Finally, the man who knocked on the door seemed to be unable to endure it any longer. He suddenly shouted, "Sister June, Sister Qingjun, are you inside? I am Su Biao." Lu Chen listened from afar. He pursed his lips and shook his head. "Su Biao? This name is not good. Just call me Stupid Su." Su Biao waited outside for a long time, but the stone door still did not budge. Su Biao became even more anxious and paced around the cave entrance. It seemed that even his forehead was sweating. Suddenly, Su Biao seemed to have made up his mind. He knelt down in front of the cave entrance and kowtowed 3 times. Lu Chen, who was watching from afar, jumped in fright. He felt that things were getting more and more interesting. After a while, Su Biao pleaded loudly, "Sister June, please come out and see me. This little brother really has an urgent matter. I beg you to save me." "You want to save me?" Lu Chen looked over with interest. He touched the yellow stone talisman in his bosom, but after a moment of silence, he let go. "I want to see when will she come out." Before he could finish the last word, he suddenly heard the door of the cave on the other side rumble. The stone door moved open and Su Biao, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up, his face full of surprise. In the distance, Lu Chen was also startled. He subconsciously said, "He came out as soon as he heard help. It can't be such a coincidence, right?" Chapter 147. The stone door opened and a beautiful figure walked out from behind the thick shadow. It was Su Qingjun. She looked at Su Biao, who was kneeling outside the cave residence, and a look of surprise flashed across her face. "Su Biao, what are you doing?" Sister Qingjun, save me." Su Biao rushed forward and reached out to hug Su Qingjun's leg. Lu Chen's spirits rose as he watched from a distance. He thought to himself, is there something strange going on between these two? He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. Unexpectedly, Su Qingjun's figure flashed and avoided Su Biao's hug. At the same time, her expression darkened as she said, "Sixth brother, what are you doing?" Su Biao was startled and seemed to realize that he was a bit rash. He shook his head desperately and said, I was wrong. Sister June, don't be angry. I really have an urgent matter." Su Qingjun snorted and her expression softened. "What's the matter? Say it." After a pause, she walked over and pulled him, saying, "Stand up and talk. You're a man kneeling on the ground for no reason. What's the matter?" Su Biao stood up. His face was full of urgency as he grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and said, "Sister June, lend me 2,000 spiritual stones first." Su Qingjun's expression changed. "So much? What do you want?" Su Biao opened his mouth, but his expression suddenly became somewhat bashful. He couldn't explain the reason for a long time and only stammered, "I need it urgently. Can you lend me the money first?" Lu Chen was also interested in what he heard. He sat down on the ridge of the field and drank a spoonful of spring water from the bucket. This water was spring water from the mountains. It was sweet and delicious, making him feel like he was watching a show while drinking tea. At the same time, he said in a low voice, asking for 2,000 spiritual stones right off the bat. He really is from a grand family. So damn rich. On the other side, Su Qingjun asked for a long time, but Su Biao still refused to explain clearly. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She glared at him and said, "If you have something to say, tell me clearly. Otherwise, why should I give you so much money?" With a long face, Su Biao said, "Elder Sister June, it's not like you don't know that our Su family has more than 100 disciples cultivating in the Kunlun party. However, more than half of our yearly offerings are given to you. If I don't ask for it from you, who else can I borrow it from?" Su Qingjun's complexion changed slightly, but she immediately sighed, looking a little apologetic. On the other hand, Lu Chen gasped from afar and said, "My God, this isn't just an ordinary kind of favoritism." After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth and said, "Sixth brother, you better tell me the whole story. If you really need my help, I will help you." Su Biao hesitated for a moment, then moved his head closer and whispered a few words in front of Su Qingjun. This time, Lu Chen didn't hear the important part clearly. He couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He scooped up a spoonful of water and drank it angrily. He thought to himself that it must be a shameful thing to be so careful in a place with no one around. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly saw Su Qingjun raise her willowy eyebrows. Her face revealed a hint of anger and she said angrily, "What? You want to use this money to redeem that prostitute?" Su Biao was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Just as he was about to beg, the two of them suddenly heard a violent coughing sound coming from a place about 100 feet away. Su Qingjun and Su Biao turned their heads at the same time. They saw Lu Qin holding his chest and coughing at the edge of the spiritual field that was mostly covered by ancient trees and rocks. It seemed that he had choked while drinking water, but it also seemed that he was struggling to not laugh out loud. His face was full of pain. "Who is it? How dare you?" Su Biao jumped 30 feet high, his face full of anger. He pointed at Lu Qin and shouted angrily, "Where did this brat come from? How dare you hide on this flying goose platform?" As he said this, his expression suddenly changed and he shouted, "You bastard, don't tell me you are so daring in your lust that you covet my sister Jun's beauty? Bah, watch me beat you to death today then throw you down from this mountain." Lu Qin coughed and waved his hand. At the same time he kept shaking his head. His expression looked a little strange. Su Biao was furious. Just as he was about to rush over and beat up this ignorant odd-job disciple, he was stopped by Su Qingjun from the side. She said, "Enough." Su Biao stopped and turned around to look at her. He only heard Su Qingjun say coldly, "He is an odd-job disciple from Baichao Tang. He is here to help me. He will be staying on this mountain for a while." Su Biao was startled. His expression suddenly became a little awkward. When he looked at the spiritual field again he found that Lu Qin had actually disappeared in just a short while. He must have felt a little awkward when he saw this scene. He didn't want to embarrass Su Qingjun so he left first. Su Qingjun also looked at the spiritual field. Her clear eyes didn't show much strangeness, but she also let out a faint sigh of relief. Su Biao, on the other hand, saw that there was no one around so he ran back to Su Qingjun's side. He begged desperately in a low voice and bowed with his hands folded in front. In the end he even looked like he was about to kneel down. This scared Su Qingjun so much that she pulled him back and scolded him harshly. However, Su Biao didn't care at all. He seemed to be very thick-skinned and kept pestering Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun scolded him and hit him. In the end she seemed to be helpless. After being pestered by Su Biao for more than 2 hours, she finally waved her hand and stuffed something into his hand. Then Su Biao ran away happily. From the window of the thatched hut, Lu Qin watched Su Biao's figure disappear like a wisp of smoke. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling with both hands on the pillow. After a while, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He seemed to have thought of something. He pondered silently and then sighed softly. "Why are you sighing?" Outside the thatched hut, Su Qingjun's voice suddenly sounded. Lu Qin stood up and walked over to open the door. He saw her standing outside, a pair of bright eyes looking at Lu Qin. Lu Qin smiled and said, "How did you eavesdrop?" "I didn't eavesdrop." Su Qingjun said, "I just wanted to come over and ask you something. But after reaching the Jindan realm, my ears are too sensitive. I can hear your voice from outside the hut." Lu Qin looked at her and smiled bitterly. He nodded and said, "All right." Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You saw everything just now?" Lu Qin hesitated for a moment and said, "I heard. Young Master Su didn't notice that I was here before, so I didn't restrain myself too much." Su Qingjun frowned with some annoyance and then said, "Can you not tell others? Otherwise, this matter will not be good for Sixth Brother's reputation." Lu Qin nodded and said, "Of course I will definitely not say half a word about this to others." "All right." Su Qingjun seemed to believe him and then turned to leave. But her body had only turned halfway when she suddenly stopped. She looked at Lu Qin and said, "You coughed just now. Were you laughing at him?" Lu Qin immediately shook his head and said, "No, I just choked on water." Su Qingjun stared at him. Lu Qin was speechless. He shrugged and said, "All right, I think it's a little funny. I didn't expect that a person like young Master Su of the Su family would actually like that kind of woman, and even want to die for her." Su Qingjun seemed to have the same feeling. She also shook her head slightly and sighed saying, "You also feel that there is no true love to speak of for that kind of woman, right?" Lu Qin suddenly became silent and didn't speak for a long time. Su Qingjun at first only sighed and didn't think too much about it. She planned to leave after saying that. Who knew that Lu Qin's reaction was a little strange? She couldn't help but look at him again and said, "What is it?" Lu Qin softly exhaled and said, "I think it's not completely like that." Su Qingjun raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you mean?" "Prostitutes are also people. Naturally they also have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Although I don't dare to be sure, but I think maybe at some time, those women also have a little bit of sincerity towards someone?" Su Qingjun looked deeply at him, a strange expression flashed across her face and said, "I didn't think that you would actually think of those women like that." "Those women?" Lu Qin smiled and stood there, looking straight at Su Qingjun's suddenly somewhat cold gaze, but he didn't retreat or shrink back. It seemed that Su Qingjun didn't want to talk about this matter with Lu Qin anymore. She turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But after a few steps she suddenly heard Lu Qin say behind her, "No matter what you think and you indeed have the qualifications to look down on those prostitutes, but I still want to say, although those women are lowly, they really are also people. There will also be times when they will have sincerity." Su Qingjun didn't turn around, so Lu Qin couldn't see her expression at the moment, and he also didn't know if she would be angry at these somewhat presumptuous words at this moment. After a while Su Qingjun opened her mouth. Her voice was calm and didn't seem to have much fluctuation. She only asked lightly, "Then have you seen that kind of woman's sincerity?" "I have seen it," Lu Qin said. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment, then said, "Very good." After that she continued to walk forward. Lu Qin looked at her back, suddenly raised his voice and said, "Also, although I believe that there will be sincerity in the prostitutes, that kind of thing is also very, very rare. Whether young Master Su has this kind of luck to meet such a woman with sincerity, I think it is very doubtful. And even if there is sincerity, whether or not it is in your brother, it is also difficult to say." Su Qingjun coldly snorted, finally stopped again, turned around and looked a little unhappy. She stared at Lu Qin and said, "After talking for so long, what exactly do you want to say?" Lu Qin said, "What I mean is, it is very rare to meet such a kind of sincerity. Why don't you go and get those 2,000 spiritual stones back?" Su Qingjun looked at him. After a moment she lightly said, "I won't." Lu Qin said, "Why is that?" Su Qingjun said, "I want to eat the eagle fruit so I can't go down the mountain." Lu Qin said, "Oh, that's true, but it's a bit of a pity." Su Qingjun said, "It's nothing, just a little bit of money. Just think of it as feeding the dogs." Lu Qin. Chapter 148. As Lu Qin sat in the straw hut, he recalled the conversation he had with Su Qingjun and suddenly felt that Atsu was quite pitiful. If he really took out 2,000 spirit stones and threw it out, would there be people who would want to be dogs? Well, this was not a question that he could think about in detail. Lu Qin hurriedly cast this thought aside. Then, in the following time, he either went to the spiritual fields outside the hut to take care of the eagle fruit tree, or he casually walked around the area and looked at the beautiful scenery of the Flying Goose Terrace. He watched the clouds and the sky as vast as the sea. He was prepared to wait like this until the sky turned dark, then find an opportunity to go down the mountain to see if there would be any unexpected gains from the trap he had set. But unexpectedly, this seemingly quiet Flying Goose Terrace was unexpectedly visited by more people before dusk, and it was not just one person. There were 2 groups of 3 people in total. The first group was people that Lu Qin knew. They were Sumo and Su Qian, who had a conflict with He Changxing and the others in the Fragrance Garden. In view of the previous incident, although Su Qingjun did not show any particularly obvious dissatisfaction, Lu Qin still consciously hid in the straw hut further away. He could not hear the conversation over there, and could only see a little bit of the situation over there through the gap in the window. Similar to the scene when Su Biao came, Sumo and Su Qian also waited at the door for a long time. After about an hour, Su Qingjun finally came to open the door. This slow reaction made Lu Qin almost suspect that Su Qingjun had really reached the Jindan realm and had good hearing and sight. Or perhaps this woman's words and actions did not match, and she was actually trying to show her strength to these people? This is a little strange. Lu Qin leaned against the window and watched curiously. Even if they were family, Su Qingjun's place was completely different from what he'd imagined. She'd only focused on cultivation every day, but it was really different from what he'd imagined. After Su Qingjun came out, she still looked as cold and beautiful as ever. Sumo and Su Qian also seemed to be very respectful towards this big sister, and hurriedly bowed to her. Then the 3 of them began to talk at the entrance of the cave. Seeing this, Lu Qin suddenly frowned and exclaimed. Something didn't seem right. Including Su Biao in front of him, these people were all his blood brothers. Logically speaking, he should at least invite them into the cave abode to drink tea and talk quietly, right? But why were all of them just standing outside the cave? Looking at the expressions of Sumo and Su Qian, it seemed that they were used to this. It seemed that this was the rule of Su Qingjuan's place. Lu Chen looked at the cave abode behind Su Qingjun from afar. He saw that behind the stone door was deep and unfathomable, and he basically couldn't see anything. The three of them talked for a while. Su Qian was slightly better, but Sumo had an excited expression on her face. She said many things to Su Qingjun, and in the middle, she gesticulated and begged for a while. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, frowned, nodded and shook her head from time to time, and occasionally revealed a helpless expression. In the end, Su Qingjun finally waved her hand. She first said something to Su Qian and then sternly reprimanded Sumo. However, the two of them had a happy expression on their faces and laughed out loud. After repeatedly thanking Su Qingjun, they quickly left. Su Qingjun turned around and returned to the cave abode. But not long after the stone door closed, Lu Chen was lying peacefully in the straw hut, waiting for the sky to turn dark. Suddenly he heard movement outside. He was stunned for a moment and climbed up to take a look. He then muttered, "It can't be, why is it so lively?" In just a short while another person came up from the foot of the mountain. In a flash, he also ran to the entrance of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. With a putong sound, he directly knelt down and then hugged the door, banging and shouting with all his might. Even Lu Chen, who was so far away, could hear a few indistinct words. "Elder sister Jun. Elder sister, you must seek justice." Lu Chen, who was in the straw hut next to him, could clearly see that the third person who came was a girl. She was very young and looked to be 1 or 2 years younger than Su Qingjun. When she came, her footsteps were light, and her expression was calm. Once she was near the entrance of the cave abode, she immediately revealed a sorrowful expression, and 2 streams of tears flowed down her face. What was even more strange was that after this girl knocked on the stone door for a while, she suddenly seemed to remember something. She suddenly reached out to her shoulder and grabbed the lapel of her clothes. She forcefully tore it and immediately tore a hole. Then she lay at the entrance of the cave and cried even louder. This time, because it wasn't too long since Sumo and Su Qian left, Su Qingjun came out much faster than before. After a while, she heard the rumbling sound of the stone door opening. As soon as Su Qingjun walked out, she saw the girl kneeling in front of her. Her clothes were disheveled and her face was full of tears. She was instantly shocked and hurriedly went up to the girl. She used both hands to help the girl up, and then asked repeatedly, her face revealing a worried and anxious expression. In the distance, Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh out loud. He looked at the straw hut with great interest. He shook his head and said to himself with a smile, "The people in the Su family are quite interesting." Because Lu Chen had gone to the Flying Goose Terrace to help Su Qingjun plant the eagle fruit tree, and he would be gone for at least 20 days, Black Dog became a problem. Lu Chen had originally asked people if he could bring Atsu to the Flying Goose Terrace, and those who were asked looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. How could a fairy-like person like Su Qingjun be together with a dog? Lu Chen was also speechless. Later, he asked around for a while and found that the situation might be true. Girls from aristocratic families like Su Qingjun and Exin had basically never had much contact with pets since they were young, so it was hard to say whether they would like Atsu from the bottom of their hearts like Exin did. It would be too troublesome if more problems arose because of this. Anyway, they would only be staying for 20 days, so after Lu Chen thought about it, Black Dog began a lonely life as a dog. Every day it would run out on its own, take care of its own food, drink and defecate. When it was dark, it would run back on its own, crawl into the house through the small dog hole and sleep. Exin did think of it, so she specially ran over to see Atu. When they met, Exin was shocked. Seeing Atu's miserable appearance, she couldn't bear to look at it. She immediately burst into tears. But compared to Exin's sadness, Atsu seemed to be much stronger. It looked indifferent all day long, even though it only had 1 eye and half a tail, and there were many terrible wounds on its body. But these wounds seemed to be unable to stop Atsu's yearning for the mountains and forests, even if Exin begged. For a long time, except for Lu Chen, Atsu had almost never been close to humans. Exin was an exception and she could talk to it a little bit. But every time Exin wanted to take Atsu away, Atsu firmly refused. It seemed it would rather go back to that cold and lonely house every night and sleep alone, but it also seemed to have incomparable patience, quietly waiting for Lu Chen's return. Unconsciously, this black dog's life and Lu Chen's seemed to have become intertwined, and it was unwilling to be separated. The setting sun shone on Kunwu City. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on a secluded courtyard. This was an unremarkable place in Kunwa City. It had been bought a long time ago and then it was left alone for a long time. It wasn't until a few days ago that someone suddenly moved in. Since the day the new owner moved in, he had been living in seclusion, almost never going out. The neighbors hadn't seen him for such a long time, nor had anyone come to visit him. The courtyard's gate was so lonely and quiet, as if it wasn't a person living inside, but a soul of nothingness. Until one day a man suddenly came here, walked into this secluded courtyard, and forcibly pulled the person hiding in the dark outside, letting the rays of the setting sun shine on his body. In the light of the setting sun, that person let out strange roars and sounds of resentment. His entire face was hideous and ugly like torn rotten meat, and he looked more like a ghost than a human. He forcefully threw his younger brother to the ground. A trace of pain and regret flashed in the depths of his eyes, but his face was filled with extreme anger. He even raised his foot and ruthlessly kicked Jianghu a few times. Jianghu rolled on the ground, screaming a few times, but he didn't dare to resist in the slightest. Or perhaps it was because he had long lost hope in himself. In front of his only elder brother in the world, he was like a wailing wild dog shedding painful tears. "What are you crying for?" He suddenly let out a low roar, grabbed Jianghu's shirt by the chest, lifted him up and directly slapped his face. Jianghu was slapped until the corner of his mouth was bleeding, but he still didn't make a sound. Looking at He in the eyes, there seemed to be only numbness left. "Just beat me to death, big brother?" He looked at his handsome, perfect, and his only elder brother in the world and said bitterly, I only brought shame to you and even caused you to be insulted and punished. In the end, you were even driven out of the Kunlun party like a dog. Big brother, don't worry about me, let me die." He's face was livid, and he slapped Jianghu again, causing him to roll on the ground. Then he grabbed him back and his eyes seemed to be emitting fire. He glared at him and shouted, "Look at yourself, what have you become now? If you weren't my brother, I would really want to kill you with one slap." Jianghu smiled bitterly, "If my death can free you, can let you be valued and cultivated by the sect again, then what's the harm in my death?" Tears kept flowing down from the corner of his eyes and he choked, "I have a rotten life, it's fine if I end up like this today, but big brother, you clearly have a great future, but I have implicated you, I. He snorted coldly, but the gaze in the depths of his eyes finally softened. He walked to the side of the stone steps and sat down, then sneered, "Why do you think I was able to come out of seclusion, and then come down the mountain to find you?" Jianghu was stunned, and then his eyes slowly lit up with a glimmer of light. Chapter 149. His hideous face suddenly trembled. He glared at He and said, "Big brother, could it be that you?" He nodded slowly, then looked at Jianghu and said, "The heavens have taken pity on me. I suddenly have a rare opportunity to escape from my current predicament. However, I need you to help me." Jianghu suddenly sat up with excitement in his eyes. He said, "That's great, but..." His expression suddenly dimmed as he said, "But how can I help you in my current state?" Before he could finish speaking, he had already interrupted him and then said in a resolute tone, "You are my only brother in this world and I only trust you." Jianghu's body trembled. He stared at He in a daze. Gradually, his hideous face seemed to brighten up. Even his gaze became somewhat gentle. He clenched his teeth and knelt in front of He. He said, "Big brother, if there's anything you want me to do, I'll do it even if I have to risk my life." He glanced at him with a gratified expression in his eyes. He then shook his head and said, "You don't have to risk your life, but you have to pay attention to hiding your tracks. For example, when you go out, change your clothes, wear a mask or something like that. Don't let anyone recognize you." As he spoke, he took out a package from behind him and threw it to Jianghu. He said, "I've prepared everything inside for you. After you go back, dress up a bit and go to all the big shops in the city." Jianghu caught the package. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and revealed a bit of fierceness. He said, "Big brother, are there still people on the mountain watching you?" He sneered and said, "There are many people watching us. They can't wait for me to do something wrong and fall. There's no need to pay attention to them. However, I can't allow anyone to disturb me with what I want to do. It's a bit inconvenient for me to go out myself, so I need you to help me." "Rest assured, big brother. I'll definitely do a good job. However, you want me to go to all the big shops in Kunwa City because..." He took out a small paper bag from his pocket and handed it to Jianghu. Jianghu received it with some doubt. He first glanced at He, then opened the folded paper. There was some scarlet powder in the center of the paper bag. He looked at it carefully, then brought it to his nose and sniffed it. Then he said in surprise, "Cinnabar? Yes, you will pretend to be a wealthy customer and then ask around to find out which shops have been in the city recently, and who has bought this thing in large quantities." He Gang nodded, put away the paper bag and said, "I understand." He smiled faintly and stood up. He raised his head and looked at the setting sun in the distance. His gaze was deep. A moment later, he suddenly laughed coldly and said, "The reincarnation formation needs a lot of cinnabar." Due to the high terrain, the setting sun on Kunlun Mountain actually stayed in sight longer than it did in Kunwu City. Flying Goose Terrace on Ziyun Peak was a good place to admire the setting sun. The sea of clouds was magnificent, and the afterglow illuminated the sky. The beautiful scenery was enchanting. However, at dusk, no one on Flying Goose Terrace was in the mood to admire the setting sun. The woman who ran to Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a member of the Su family. At least, Su Qingjun seemed to be very familiar with her. During the tearful complaint, the woman seemed to be saying something to Su Qingjun. It seemed like she was complaining, but it also seemed like she was reprimanding someone. In the end, her eyes were filled with tears. Su Qingjun's attitude towards this woman was different from how she treated Su Biao, Sumo, Su Qian and the others. She was obviously more sympathetic. But later, when the woman seemed to make a request to Su Qingjun revealed an awkward expression. Lu Chen watched this scene with interest. He recalled the woman's light footsteps and calm expression when she went up the mountain. It formed a sharp contrast with her current appearance of begging with tears streaming down her face. The two women seemed to be in a deadlock. Su Qingjun sighed and said a few words to the woman, pointing at the spiritual fields on this side. Although Lu Chen couldn't hear what she said, he could clearly guess that Su Qingjun was defending him for the eagle fruits. She was referring to him not being able to go down the mountain. Who would have thought that after the woman heard this, she would cry even harder? She even hugged Su Qingjun's waist and rubbed her head against her, looking like she was about to die. Su Qingjun's face immediately revealed an awkward expression. She softly advised the woman for a while, but it seemed to be useless. In the end, she seemed to be forced into a corner and shook her head with a bitter smile. She softly said a few words to the woman. The woman's face suddenly revealed a happy expression. She suddenly stood up as if her wish had finally been fulfilled. After hugging Su Qingjun tightly, she immediately walked down the mountain. She walked hurriedly and quickly, as if she was afraid that Su Qingjun would call her back and regret her decision. Su Qingjun silently watched the woman's figure gradually disappear into the distance. Her face also revealed a faint trace of helplessness. In the distance, in the thatched hut, Lu Chen withdrew his gaze and lay down on the bed. He began to close his eyes and rest. The light outside the hut gradually dimmed. It was probably the time for the sun to finally set. Night was coming. It was also at this time that a burst of light footsteps suddenly came from outside the thatched hut, passing by the side of the hut. At this moment there were only two people on the Flying Goose Terrace. Other than Lu Chen, there was also Su Qingjun. The sky was already dark. Why didn't she return to the cave residence? Why did she come here? Lu Chen sat up and looked outside the hut. He slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, he opened the door of the thatched hut and walked out. The night was about to turn dark. The setting sun in the distance was only left with a golden edge, as if it was still longing for the last bit of light in this world. On the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace, there were layers upon layers of black shadows. It was as if the shadows came from all directions. On top of the rocks, Su Qingjun stood alone. The mountain wind blew past, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. She was like a thin leaf that could be blown away by the wind at any time. She was also like a small pine tree planted on the edge of the cliff. No matter how the wind, knives, frost, swords and time attacked her under the night sky, she had a feeling that she had weathered the frost and was still fresh in the face of snow. Her figure, like a whisper in the night, was so beautiful that it did not seem like the quiet time of the human world. And looking into the distance, was there some sadness in her eyes? Lu Chen slowly walked over, but when he was about 10 feet away from the figure of the woman, he suddenly stopped. After looking carefully for a while, he turned around again, looking like he wanted to walk back to the thatched hut. "Why don't you come over?" Su Qingjun's calm voice came from behind. Even though she did not turn around, she seemed to be able to clearly feel what was happening behind her. Lu Chen stopped and looked at her. He saw that Su Qingjun still had the same appearance as before. What he saw was only a beautiful and deep back. Well, actually, I was a little worried that you would take things too hard and want to jump down. Lu Chen said very calmly, but now it seems that everything is fine. I was thinking too much, so I plan to go back to sleep now. Su Qingjuan's figure moved slightly, and then she turned around to look at Lu Chen. The expression on her face looked a little strange. She said, "You think I want to jump down?" Lu Chen did not seem to be embarrassed at all. He said seriously, "I think the wrong way. I'm sorry." Hearing these words, Su Qingjun shook her head and was silent for a moment. Suddenly she said, "Everyone who came today is from our Su family. You also saw them, right?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I saw them all. But at the beginning, because Su Biao was close, he had a rough idea of what was going on. I was at the thatched hut after that, so I didn't hear anything. I don't know what happened." Su Qingjun nodded slightly. Looking at Lu Chen, her gaze softened a little. After a moment she said, "You can take the initiative to avoid it and save me some embarrassment. Thank you." Lu Chen looked up and down at Su Qingjun. He thought that this woman was really different from others. Not to mention her beautiful appearance, her exquisite mind was even more clever. She could hear three things from one thing. There was a trace of admiration in his eyes. Then he said, "It is late at night. Shiji Su, be careful. The wind here is cold and dew is heavy. Take care of yourself. I will go back first. The scenery here is very good." Su Qingjun seemed not to hear Lu Chen's words. She said to herself, "The sea of clouds billows like a vast ocean. It is a rare beautiful scenery. In the night it is a different scene than in the day. Don't you want to see it?" Lu Chen stopped and looked at Su Qingjun. He suddenly smiled. He did not decline, nor did he show any humility. He just nodded and said, "Thank you." Then he walked up the cliff. Below the cliff was steep. As soon as he walked up, he felt the mountain wind suddenly become much fiercer. The whistling sound was endless, as if it came from the 9 heavens and swept down to the earth. Thick clouds were under his feet. They were vast and boundless, reaching into the depths of the blue dome of heaven. Smoke and dust rose and fell like waves. Where the wind and clouds were, the world was vast. When he looked back, he saw a bright moon rising slowly. It was late at night. He stood by her side. When they stood side by side, their clothes fluttered like messy waves. The feeling of the strong wind brushing against their faces, as if there was a pair of wings under their ribs. Su Qingjun turned around and glanced at him. Her expression was calm, devoid of joy or sorrow. Lu Chen didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the distant sea of clouds, watching the faint moonlight illuminate the vast sea of clouds. It was a magnificent and wondrous scene. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, "It really is a beautiful scene." Su Qingjun smiled slightly. She was as beautiful as a lily in the night. Then she also turned to look. The two of them looked at the sea of clouds under the moonlight. They stood together for a long time. Until the moon was in the middle of the sky, Su Qingjun looked away. After a moment she suddenly said, "I want to go down the mountain tonight." Lu Chen looked into the distance. There was no expression on his face. He said lightly, "It is not worth it." Chapter 150. The night wind blew. On the cliff, Su Qingjuan's eyes were clear and bright, like the bright moon hanging high in the sky at this moment, cold but not dazzling. She seemed to have a trace of curiosity. She looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why do you say that?" "There's a curfew." Lu Chen said, "If someone finds out, your good reputation will be ruined." Su Qingjun looked at him for a moment and suddenly smiled. She said, "No, what you said just now, that's not what you meant." Then she paused and said, "Could it be that you have already guessed the reason why they came to me today? Except for Su Biao, I still don't know about other people's matters." Lu Chen once again expressed his attitude to Su Qingjun and said, "But I think that most of their matters should not be very urgent. At least for you, perhaps it is not worth breaking the sect rules and going to Kunlun at night." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment and suddenly asked, "Have you ever thought that perhaps it is really a small matter for me, but for others, it may become a big urgent matter?" Lu Chen said, "So you want to go down the mountain?" Su Qingjun nodded and said, "They asked me to do something." "They asked you and you agreed? After all, we are a family." Lu Chen frowned and looked at Su Qingjun without saying anything for a moment. Su Qingjun was also silent for a moment and said, "When Su Biao was here, you may have heard those words. There are too many things in the house and only I have them. If I don't take care of my brothers and sisters, who will take care of them?" Lu Chen blinked and suddenly looked left and right. Then he looked at the dark abyss at the bottom of the cliff not far away. He seemed to feel a little guilty. Su Qingjun was a little surprised and said, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Chen said, "I want to see if there is a way to escape. Maybe you will kill me later." Su Qingjun was stunned at first, then she burst out laughing and said, "Nonsense, why would I do that?" Lu Chen also laughed and said, "In fact, with your identity, you don't need to say so much to a servant disciple like me." Su Qingjun's eyes flashed like the moonlight in the sky, and she smiled and said, "I think you are different from ordinary servant disciples. You are especially smart." After a pause, she seemed to feel that she had not said enough and added, "Well, you are smarter than many Qi cultivation realm and even foundation building realm disciples I know." Lu Chen immediately took a step back and looked Su Qingjun up and down. He said seriously, "You must have something to ask of me. Do you have something to say?" Su Qingjun sighed and said, "You are indeed a smart person, much better than the brothers in my family. If they were a little more like you, I would not be so annoyed." Lu Chen smiled and said, "If your words were to spread, I would not be able to stay on Kunlun Mountain. What are you trying to say?" Su Qingjun said calmly, "After I go down the mountain, I may not be able to come back in time tomorrow morning. Then, if someone comes looking for me but finds that I am missing, and at the same time because of the eagle fruit, I should be guarding this flying goose platform to my death. This will be very troublesome." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "You want me to help you stop people?" Su Qingjun said frankly, "Yes, I have no choice. Right now there are only the two of us on this flying goose platform, and the eagle fruit tree is there. Even if I go down the mountain, I can't hide it from you, so I can only ask you to help me cover up." Lu Chen nodded and said, "No wonder you said such trivial things to me earlier." Su Qingjun said, "How about it, can you help me?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I am only an odd job disciple, I don't have that ability." Before he could finish, Su Qingjun had already interrupted him and said, "You, as an odd job disciple, are much better than them. I think you can do it." Lu Chen gritted his teeth in distress and said, "This flying goose platform has always been quiet, maybe no one will come even after half a day." He suddenly looked at Su Qingjun and frowned, "Do many people usually come here?" "Not really, sometimes there are many, sometimes there are only a few days without seeing anyone." Lu Chen snorted and said, "There are quite a lot of people. It's a big family." "All right." Lu Chen shook his head helplessly, then straightened his expression and said, "Then there is one last thing." "Speak." "What if the eagle fruit suddenly ripens tomorrow morning?" Su Qingjun suddenly fell silent and did not speak for a long time. Lu Chen did not rush her and only looked at her quietly. After a while, Su Qingjun frowned her delicate and beautiful eyebrows and said, "Why don't you eat it?" Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said unhappily, "Hey, if someone sees this, I'm afraid they will really beat me to death and throw me off this cliff, okay?" Su Qingjun looked a little distressed and even used her hand to rub the space between her eyebrows, as if she also felt that this matter was a little troublesome. Then she said to Lu Chen with a somewhat resentful tone, "Didn't you say that the eagle fruit won't ripen so soon?" Lu Chen coughed and said, "What if?" Su Qingjun thought for a long time and finally waved her hand and sighed, "If it's really that unlucky, you can just bury it in the soil and use it as fertilizer. Just don't let anyone see it." "All right." Su Qingjun turned around and was about to leave, but at this moment, Lu Chen suddenly called out to her. Su Qingjun turned to look at him and said, "Is there anything else?" Lu Chen said, "You forgot to mention the reward." Su Qingjun was startled and said, "What reward?" Lu Chen looked at her with a strange gaze and said, "If I help you with this matter, it's quite risky. Don't you need to give me some reward for helping you with such a favor?" "I see." Su Qingjun seemed to have a sudden realization and said, "So that's what you think. That's fine too. Hey, this should be a matter of course, okay?" Lu Chen said to Su Qingjun seriously. Su Qingjun said indifferently, Maybe. But in the past, no matter if they're from the Su family or not, they've never asked for anything in return when they help me. At most I'll just thank them and they'll be very happy. I'm different from them." Lu Chen snorted coldly and seemed to express some contempt and disdain for those people in the past. Then he said seriously, "Actually, think about it. Those people said they didn't want your reward, but in fact they made you owe them a favor. Favors are the most difficult to repay. If they come to you in the future, will you help them or not? When you help them, will it be more tiring than directly giving them some spirit stones?" Su Qingjun carefully thought about it and after a moment, A hint of agreement appeared on her face. She nodded and said, "What you said is very reasonable." "That's right." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm doing this for your sake. I don't want you to owe me a debt of gratitude and feel bad." Su Qingjun said, "Well then how much do you want?" Lu Chen thought about it and secretly thought, "Won't I cut you in half and make you bleed?" Then he made up his mind, gritted his teeth and stamped his feet. He tentatively asked, 2,000 spirit stones? Su Qingjun nodded and looked at Lu Chen with appreciation. She said, "I didn't expect you to be such a kind person. You have a good character." The night was vast and dark. The beautiful woman took advantage of the night and quietly disappeared into the boundless darkness. Lu Chen stood on the edge of the cliff, facing the wind. The mountain wind made his clothes flutter, and the biting cold wind swept across his face from time to time. He always felt like he was being slapped in the face. When he looked at the night sky and the bright moon in the sky, he did not know why he felt a sense of loss. Lu Chen let out a long sigh, a look of regret on his face as he muttered to himself. He said to himself, "If I had known, I would have said 20,000. These rich people are really hateful." As he said this, he shook his head and turned around to walk down the cliff. He walked all the way back to his hut and closed the door. The night gradually darkened. In the blink of an eye, about 2 hours had passed. Suddenly, there was a slight movement in the cold darkness on Fian platform. The door of the hut was silently pushed open, and then Lu Chen walked out. Under the moonlight, his figure was never in the light, but hidden in the shadows. He was faintly discernible, moving vaguely toward the mountain road below Fian platform. Not long after, his figure also disappeared into the darkness. That night, Kunlun Mountain was still cold and quiet. Most of the Kunlun disciples had long been accustomed to this kind of work and rest due to the constant curfew for many years. Although there were still guards outside the house where a horrifying murder had occurred a few days ago, it was obvious that the guards were much more relaxed than before. Even people who practiced Taoism would feel uncomfortable in the face of death or the dead. Of course, it was a different story for those who cultivated the evil arts of demons and devils. Lu Chen's figure quietly came to the outside of the house that originally belonged to He Changsheng. He hid in the woods far away and then quietly looked over there. At least from the outside, the house did not seem to have changed. It was as if the indignant servant disciple was still living in it, dissatisfied with many things in this world. The terrifying aura of the strange formation that once existed in the house seemed to be blocked by the walls, not revealing any secrets to the outside world. Lu Chen hid in the woods for a long time. He did not seem to have any intention of sneaking into the house to investigate. He only quietly looked over there, a complicated light flashing in his eyes, as if he was thinking about something. Did the person hiding in the deepest part of the darkness already know what happened here? If he was a spy of the evil sect, then what would he do? If he saw such a pure reincarnation formation, what would he think? Lu Chen's gaze slowly flickered. Suddenly, he moved away from the house and looked towards the east side of the house. In the darkness of the night, there also seemed to be a dense and wide forest. In the darkness of the night, he coldly stared at the house on this side. Chapter 151. The shadow moved stealthily in the darkness, moving away from its original location without a sound, and then headed towards its destination. Meanwhile, the disciples guarding outside the house in front of it were completely oblivious to it. To the east of the hut was an extremely vast forest that extended all the way to the nearest mountain peak. In the night, this forest seemed especially quiet and deep. Lu Chen's figure stepped into the forest, blended into the darkness, quietly looked at the surroundings and then started to walk deeper into the forest. His mouth trembled slightly as if he was secretly repeating something. At the same time, he would occasionally turn back to look at the direction of the house, as if adjusting his direction according to the position there. Eastern. Life Gate. Divine. Lord. His eyes were bright and sharp, as if he was carefully identifying the direction in that strange and obscure formula, trying hard to find something. The night was deep, the forest was also deep and dim, but Lu Chen seemed to be like a fish in water, unusually adapted to this environment. He walked steadily. After several zhangs deep into the forest, he suddenly stopped. His hand gently raised, fingers slightly flexed, as if slowly calculating something in the air. Very quickly, his eyes suddenly lit up. That finger also stopped pointing at a certain direction. That was somewhere deep in the forest. That place did not look any different, just that there were many very dense trees. It was a stretch of darkness, perhaps even darker than other places. as if it was hiding a secret, quietly waiting in this deep night. Lu Chen took a step forward, but he suddenly paused in midair and slowly retracted his foot. He stood in the darkness, watching that stretch of deep darkness from afar, as if he had fallen into a sudden silence. There was no murderous aura, no danger, no warning signs or signs that could cause alarm. That place ahead seemed no different from the surroundings, only hiding that secret, waiting for him to go over and discover. But Lu Chen still stood there motionless. He coldly looked at that place for a very long time. If he wanted to lure the snake out of its hole, then, after seeing the evil sect formation in that house, would there also be someone similarly wanting to know who he was wanting to find him? Very few people knew about the top and strange methods of the devil cult, but those who knew were definitely not ordinary people. Could such a person have also set up some unpredictable traps? Lu Chen was like a shadow, quietly standing in the darkness. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly turned around and quietly walked away without looking back, not even sparing a glance at the darkness. The night was deep and no one knew what had happened in the boundless darkness. Only the swaying and silent shadows floated around in the sky, adding a bit of desolation to the night. The first rays of the morning sun shone down from the sky, illuminating the thatched hut on the Purple Cloud Peak's Flying Goose platform. Lu Chen yawned, stretched his body and rested on the bed for a while. Then he lazily got up, opened the door and walked out. It was really comfortable to have no one to care about him. He was the only one on the huge fairyland-like Flying Goose platform. Even though the most important stone door on the other side of the mountain wall was tightly shut, at least for this morning, this place seemed to belong to him alone. The fresh morning breeze blew over from the sea of clouds on the other side of the cliff, bringing with it a moist and gentle scent. It felt very comfortable on his face. The verdant trees on the mountain swayed with the wind as if they were also smiling. The sound of birds chirping and rustling was like an ancient and elegant song, intoxicating people. Lu Chen strolled from one side to the other, openly and unscrupulously looking around the entire Flying Goose platform that he did not have the time to visit yesterday, memorizing all the terrain and roads in his heart. Then he walked back to the side of the spiritual field, and carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees. There seemed to be no change in the situation. There was no eagle fruit that suddenly made things difficult for Su Qingjun, forcing them to suddenly ripen this morning. Of course, after a day of spiritual power cultivation and growth, these eagle fruits were still a little bigger than yesterday. The immaturity had faded a little and there was a little red on them. Perhaps they would not ripen today, but there was no telling tomorrow. No matter what, he still had to do the work that needed to be done. He could not leave these eagle fruit trees alone when Su Qingjun was not on the mountain. But no matter how he looked at it, in such a place that looked like a holy land for cultivation, it was really putting the cart before the horse if he did not cultivate and instead lay in the mud to plant trees. Lu Chen sighed, looked around at the beautiful scenery and shrugged. Who asked you to be a servant disciple? The mountain forest was quiet and the scenery was beautiful. Time flew by without him realizing it. Lu Chen finished his work in the spirit field. His hands were black and his body was covered in a lot of black mud. He looked up at the sky and saw that the sun had risen quite a bit. It seemed that in another 2 hours the morning would be over. It's still quite quiet, no one came looking for me. Lu Chen was a little happy, and at the same time he sincerely hoped that Su Qingjun would come back as soon as possible. That way these 2,000 spirit stones would be very easy to earn. Unexpectedly, just as he was secretly happy, he suddenly saw a figure appear on the mountain path below the Flying Goose Terrace, walking quickly in his direction. Damn it! Lu Chen's face immediately became long, and he looked angrily at the figure on the mountain path. He thought to himself, why is this person so disappointing? Can't he let me be happy for a while? Please wait. When the young man on the mountain path was about to reach the Flying Goose Terrace, suddenly a figure jumped out in front of him, blocking the mountain path, and shouted loudly. The young man was startled and could not help but take a step back, then looked at Lu Chen standing in the middle of the road in front of him, and asked in surprise, "Who are you?" Lu Chen's eyes fell on this person's face, and his eyes slightly narrowed. He recognized that this young man was also a member of the Su family. It was Su Wen, one of the brothers of the Su family, that had the dispute over the stone garlic that had occurred in the grass garden that day, and besides Sumo and Su Qian, he was one of the 3 brothers of the Su family. Lu Chen slightly raised his eyebrows, and for a moment he remembered that yesterday Sumo and Su Qian came here together to see Su Qingjun, but among the so-called 3 brothers of the Su family, only Su Wen was missing. When he saw Su Wen yesterday he did not think so, But today, seeing Su Wen come to the Flying Goose Terrace alone, there seemed to be some unknown little secret. These thoughts flashed past Lu Chen's face, but his expression was calm and he said to Su Wen calmly, "I am Lu Chen, greeting young Master Su." Su Wen was shocked again and said, "You know me?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "I used to work in the Flowing Fragrance Garden, and I have seen young Master Su. With a talent like you, it is very normal for me to know you." Su Wen made an "oh" sound and looked a little proud, then he waved his hand and said, "We are now on the mountain of Kunlun, and in the sect there is no need to talk about common names, let us call each other senior and junior brothers." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Very well, greeting senior brother Su." Su Wen nodded. He was just about to walk forward when he was suddenly stunned, and he seemed to have finally recovered from his shock. He looked at Lu Chen with astonishment and said, "Wait, this Soaring Goose Terrace is where my big sister June's abode is located, and it's always been her quiet and alone. Why are you here?" Lu Chen pointed in the direction of the spiritual field and said, "I am here to plant trees." Then he told him about how Su Qingjun wanted to eat the eagle fruit, and how Baichao Tang did its best to help, and so on. Su Wen listened and nodded, and then saw that there were indeed many black mud stains on Lu Chen's body, as if he had just walked out of the spiritual field, and so he believed him a little more and said with a smile, "I see, then you must do your job well and do not slack off, and delay my sister June's cultivation plan or you will suffer. Of course, if you do well, this young master will naturally give you some rewards." Lu Chen looked at him with a smile and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, senior brother Su." Su Wen nodded, and then prepared to walk around Lu Chen, and walk towards the abode on the other side of the mountain wall. Unexpectedly, Lu Chen turned around and blocked his way again. Su Wen's face darkened and he shouted, "Lu Chen, what are you doing? Why won't you let me go?" Lu Chen's expression was still gentle, and even though he was scolded by Su Wen, he did not get angry and only said, "Senior brother Su, it is not convenient for you to go now." "Nonsense." Su Wen looked angry and pointed at Lu Chen and said, "I want to see Sister June, how dare you stop me? Let me tell you, Sister June loves me the most. If you dare to be impudent again, believe it or not, I will go back and tell Sister June, and ask her to immediately chase you down the mountain." "Oh." Lu Chen looked up at the sky helplessly and thought for a while and said to Su Wen, "Senior brother Su, to tell you the truth, the person who asked me to stop you here was actually Su Qingjun, Shiji Su." Su Wen was shocked and said, "What? Impossible." His face suddenly became pale, as if this sentence had deeply provoked him. Then, his reaction suddenly became intense and he directly shouted towards the abode in the distance, Sister June, you are really annoyed with me? I don't believe it." As he shouted, the young man actually sounded like he was about to cry, and this scene made Lu Chen, who was standing at the side, somewhat dumbfounded. Even with Lu Chen's calm and sharp temperament, he was stunned for a while before he reacted. He quickly grabbed the shouting Su Wen and said with a bitter smile, "This is a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Senior brother Su, young master Su, you have misunderstood." Su Wen looked at him and asked with a trembling voice, "What Shiji Su means is that today, in order to eat the eagle fruit and prepare for the perfect Jindan realm, she will not see anyone and no one is allowed to disturb her. That is why she asked me to stop everyone here." He emphasized the last three words. "Everyone?" Su Wen became spirited. "Yes, everyone." Lu Chen looked at him with a smile that was not a smile and said, "Senior brother Su, the relationship between you and your brother is really good." Of course. Knowing that he was not detested, Su Wen immediately regained his spirit, and even said with a hint of arrogance, "Only those two idiots, Sumo and Su Qian, refuse to follow me. Wait until I get the benefits and they will be greedy to death." Lu Chen looked at Su Wen's complacent face and smiled slightly. Chapter 152. "But I'm already here." Su Wen paced back and forth on the mountain path. After a moment of hesitation, he shook his head and said, "I can't come all the way here for nothing." Lu Chen frowned, but before he could speak he heard Su Wen say, "How about this, move aside. I'll go and see Sister June. Once she hears that I'm here, she'll definitely see me." With that, Su Wen once again strode towards the abode on the Soaring Goose platform, completely ignoring Lu Chen's obstruction. Lu Chen stood to the side and was somewhat speechless. He thought to himself, "Do these young masters from aristocratic families really can't be bothered to look at me?" Su Wen could be willful, but Lu Chen had to consider other things. If he were to knock and shout at the door, the fact that Su Qingjun wasn't here might be exposed. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, Lu Chen hurriedly took a few steps forward. Just as Su Wen was about to reach out and knock on the door, Lu Chen once again stopped him. Su Wen's face immediately revealed an unhappy expression. He looked coldly at Lu Chen and said, "Don't you have any self-awareness? Be careful, you're asking for a beating." Lu Chen glanced at Su Wen indifferently and then calmly said, "Young Master Su, before you disturb Shiji Su's meditation, I have two things to say. If you still want to find her after you hear them, I won't stop you. What do you think?" Su Wen didn't notice that Lu Chen had suddenly changed the way he addressed him from Senior Su to Young Master Su. He only revealed an impatient expression, but in the end, he still waved his hand and snorted. He said, "Say it quickly. Servants like you are the most troublesome." Lu Chen's eyes paused for a moment on Su Wen's finger that was waving in front of his eyes. A dark flame flashed in the depths of his eyes. He then smiled, his expression still gentle. He said, "Young Master Su, your reputation is naturally great. When Shiji Su heard that you're here, she should come out to see you?" Su Wen's face revealed a pleased expression. Lu Chen couldn't be bothered to look at him, and he continued speaking. "However, no matter what Senior Sister Su is cultivating right now, what if you disturb her at a critical juncture and cause her cultivation to be damaged? Wouldn't this cause a grudge to arise in her heart?" Su Wen's expression changed and he said in a deep voice, "Are you trying to scare me? How could there be such a coincidence? It's so early in the morning, maybe my elder sister June is still sleeping." Lu Chen helplessly looked up at the sky and saw that the sun was almost at its zenith. He laughed dryly and said, "It's not likely that she's sleeping at this time." This is the first sentence. The second sentence is, "Even if Shiji Su loves you very much and doesn't bear a grudge, young Master Su, think about it. Shiji Su is currently carrying the expectations of her family's elders. Even the flaws in her Jindan realm need to be eliminated with the eagle fruit. She's such a hardworking person. If you disturb her with the deep love between you and her, how could she bear to do so?" At the end of his speech, Lu Chen's words were sincere and full of emotion. His eyes shone brightly as if he was trying his best to persuade Su Wen. Su Wen seemed to be a little shaken after listening to Lu Chen's words. He stopped in his tracks and frowned. He hesitated for a while as if he was really moved by Lu Chen's words. "That doesn't sound wrong." Su Wen said to himself, "I don't have anything urgent to do. How about I come back after a few days?" Lu Chen smiled and nodded. Su Wen thought for a while and finally made up his mind. He turned around and walked away. But this time he didn't even greet Lu Chen. It seemed that he was still a little dissatisfied with this ignorant odd-job disciple who blocked his way. Lu Chen followed him to the side of the mountain path and watched Su Wen leave. He then grinned and said, "I almost believed what you said." Lu Chen also felt that it was a little funny. He shook his head and turned around, walking towards the thatched hut. When he was not far from the thatched hut, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. He frowned and looked at the spiritual field next to the thatched hut. He saw that on the originally empty ridge of the field, there was now a figure with his back facing Lu Chen. He wore a gray robe with big sleeves and a jade belt around his waist. His hair was gray and white. It seemed that he was not young. At this moment, the old man was holding a large wine urn in his hands. While looking at the eagle fruit trees in the spiritual field, he would occasionally take a sip of wine from the urn. Even from a distance, one could smell the rich aroma of wine. Lu Chen looked at the back of the old man who suddenly appeared. His pupils shrank a little from the moment Su Wen appeared until now, although his attention was diverted by Su Wen, but this old man silently appeared beside the thatched hut and he actually did not notice it at all. It was obvious that this old man's cultivation was extremely high. He was definitely not an ordinary person. At this moment, the old man in front drank a mouthful of wine and suddenly said, "These 7 eagle fruit trees were planted by you?" Lu Chen looked around and confirmed that there was only him and the old man left on the flying goose platform. He then slowly walked forward and said, "Yes." The old man patted the wine jar and said with some praise, "Well planted." Lu Chen walked to the side of the old man and saw his face. He saw that the old man's face was wrinkled and his eyes were slightly cloudy. Perhaps it was because he had drunk too much. Other than that, he had a very conspicuous red nose. "Senior, may I ask who you are?" Lu Chen asked carefully. The old man looked back at him and suddenly grinned, revealing a few white teeth. He said, "I'm just passing by and came here to take a look." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment but still opened his mouth and said, "Senior, please forgive me for being blunt. This is the cave of our sect's Jean Dan Friar Su Qingjun. Normally only she can cultivate here. With your identity, perhaps you shouldn't come here so casually. The old man's face sank slightly, and he actually seemed to possess a dignified aura. It was truly like the difference between the heavens and the earth when compared to Su Wen from before. It was to the point that Lu Qin felt his heart thump abruptly as vigilance involuntarily arose in his heart. You dare to speak to me like this? Do you really know who I am? Lu Qin was silent for a moment and said, Disciple has been rude. But recently Shiji Su is at a critical juncture in her cultivation and may need to cultivate quietly. I am doing this because Shiji Su instructed me to do so. As he spoke, he raised his head slightly and said calmly, We are all from the same sect and have camaraderie. With your cultivation realm, I can only take it as helping the younger generation. When Shiji Su comes out in the future, it will be another good karma. I believe she will remember your kindness. Everyone will be happy, so why not? Lu Qin smiled and said with a humble expression, This is just disciple's humble opinion, please give me your guidance. The old man replied with an "Oh," and took another look at Lu Qin. After that, he smiled and even his gaze became much gentler. He said, Little brat, you have a sharp tongue. You really know how to talk. Senior is flattering me. I'm only doing my duty. Lu Qin said. But what if I don't want to leave today? What will you do? The old man suddenly laughed again as if he was testing Lu Qin. He laughed and hugged the wine jar, looking at Lu Qin with interest. Lu Qin was startled and then smiled helplessly. He said, Then I can't do anything. Hey little guy, aren't you very smart? Why don't you think of a way to drive this old man away or trick me? The old man smiled and seemed to be in a good mood today. Lu Qin said honestly, You are older than me and your cultivation is thousands of times stronger than mine. How can I use force? In the face of such a huge difference in strength, what was the use of these little tricks? It will only make a joke if I say it. It is better to be honest. The old man laughed heartily, seeming to be very carefree. He took a big gulp of wine, and a blush flashed across his face before disappearing in an instant. He smiled at Lu Qin and said, Let me tell you actually. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly frowned and stopped. At the same time, Lu Qin also sensed something and turned his head to look. After a moment, both of their gazes saw that on the mountain path, another figure appeared. The figure was hurriedly and quickly walking towards the flying goose platform. The old man's face darkened. He suddenly cursed and said, Damn it! What is wrong with the Su family? There are so many damn people. There is no end to it all day. Lu Qin was startled. He did not seem to think that with the old man's status, he would actually curse so unscrupulously. He could not help but look at him. The old man seemed to feel Lu Qin's gaze. He rolled his eyes and said to Lu Qin, Little guy, listen to me. If you can get rid of this person, I believe it will be of great help to the owner of this place. Lu Qin looked at him strangely and said, If you really don't like this person, just scold him and it will be enough. Naturally that person will be scared witless and run away. Why go through so much trouble? Moreover, I may not be able to get rid of him. The gray-haired old man glared at him and said unhappily, If I could show up, I would have already beaten these useless people to the point that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them. It's either that June girl is soft-hearted or that she can't bear to part with these useless things. Forget it, let's not talk so much. Actually, even if I didn't come, you would still stop them, right? Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, I still have to stop them. But whether I can stop them or not is another matter. Stop them, stop them. The old man laughed and said, These useless people are useless. They only know how to lie on June girl's body all day as if they are sucking her blood. I feel disgusted just looking at them. Get rid of them and give June girl some peace and quiet. I will naturally thank you. And thank me? Lu Qin's eyes lit up and he immediately said seriously, What are you talking about, senior? I am not that kind of person. After saying that, he turned around and strode towards the mountain path. Chapter 153. The person who came was a youth about 16 or 17 years old. He looked to be about the same age as EXN, but his temperament was completely different from the cheerful and lively EXN. This youth's face was fair without any facial hair. His appearance could be considered handsome, but for some reason, there was a rather feminine aura between his brows. Even the way he walked had a slightly swaying appearance of a girl. When Lu Qin saw this, he was momentarily stunned, and the words that he originally wanted to say were stuck in his throat. The youth also saw Lu Chen suddenly standing in front of the mountain path, blocking the way. He frowned his slender eyebrows, stopped walking and said to Lu Chen, "Who are you?" It would have been better if he hadn't spoken, but the moment he spoke, Lu Chen immediately felt goosebumps all over his body. As it turned out, this youth's voice was actually very feminine. It didn't have the rough tone of an ordinary man, and sounded almost like a girl. "I am Lu Chen. Young master, are you also here to find Su Qingjun Shijisu?" Lu Chen quickly controlled his emotions, coughed and then opened his mouth to ask. "Yes." The youth suddenly frowned, stared at Lu Chen and said, "What did you mean by the word, also, just now? Could it be that someone else came before me?" "Yes, there was already a young master of the Su family called Su Wen who came before us," Lu Chen said. "Su Wen?" The youth snorted as if there was some disdain on his face. He then walked forward and at the same time said, "I am also a member of the Su family called Su Tong, Sister Jun's 8th brother. Step aside, I have something to see her about." Su Tong took 2 steps forward and suddenly stopped, because he found that Lu Chen was still blocking the mountain path, and had no intention of letting him pass. Su Tong's face darkened, and a trace of anger appeared on his face. However, his face was really feminine and handsome like a girl's, and this anger made him look like a girl's coquettish pout, causing Lu Chen's scalp to go numb. "What are you doing? Why are you stopping me?" Lu Chen forced a smile and forced himself to explain Su Qingjuan's situation to him. In the end he even persuaded him patiently, "Young Master Su, you and Shiji Su are brother and sister. I believe you can understand her current situation. She needs to take the eagle fruit for a few days. Why don't you go back first? As long as this period is over she—" "No." Su Tong suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Lu Chen's words straightforwardly and even somewhat rudely. Lu Chen was stunned. "Why is that?" Su Tong looked as if he was clenching his teeth, but he didn't say what the reason was. He only said loudly again, "I have an urgent matter, I want to see Sister June now. She is currently cultivating in the cave, so it is indeed inconvenient for her to come out." Lu Chen said earnestly, "Why don't you tell me what you need? Once she's free I'll tell her immediately. I won't hold you up. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care." Su Tong suddenly shouted loudly. At the same time, his eyes suddenly became misty, looking as if he was about to cry. Lu Chen was dumbstruck and momentarily forgot what he should say. He thought to himself that the Su family was indeed a strange family. Could it be that the luck and benefits of the entire family had all been taken by Su Qingjun, and the rest were all people that couldn't be looked at directly? No wonder that old man looked as if he hated the Su family to the bone. It seemed that he had been viciously disgusted in the past. But even with such a family, Su Qingjun still patiently took care of them. Lu Chen suddenly felt that his impression of Su Qingjun had undergone an earth-shattering change. This wasn't a cold and arrogant temperament at all. This was clearly the heart of a bodhisattva. Because he felt that his 3 views and knowledge had been greatly stimulated, Lu Chen was in a daze. Carelessly, Su Tong ran past him and dashed towards the entrance of the cave. Lu Chen was shocked and quickly chased after him. Just as he wanted to catch him, he found that Su Tong was running gracefully, swaying like a lotus. For a moment he couldn't catch him no matter how hard he tried. He could only smile bitterly and go around in a circle, stopping him at the entrance of the cave. He persuaded, "Miss Su, don't be like this." "What?" Su Tong suddenly raised his eyebrows and stared at Lu Chen, shouting, "What did you call me?" Lu Chen was shocked and immediately came to his senses. He immediately said, "Young Master Su. Young Master Su, I misspoke. Please don't be angry." Su Tong stared at him hatefully, his face full of anger. Lu Chen felt that this was a thorny problem. He thought that this Su Tong was more troublesome than all the people from the Su family added together. At that moment he had no choice but to let out a long sigh. His expression bleak, he said, Forget it. In any case I have tried my best. Even if Shiji Su is punished because of this, I don't think she can blame me." As he said that, he shook his head and took 2 steps to the side, giving way to the cave's stone door. Su Tong snorted and stretched out his hand to slap the stone door. But just as his palm was about to land on the door, he suddenly retracted his hand. He frowned and looked at Lu Chen. His face revealed a suspicious expression. He said, "Tell me clearly. Why would Sister June be punished?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Shiji Su is a heavenly genius. At such a young age she has already surpassed all others in cultivation. The speed at which she advanced to the Jindan realm is unprecedented. You should be clear about this, right? Su Tong's face revealed a proud expression. He said, "Of course. Our sister June was born this outstanding." Lu Chen's eyes flashed. From the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a gray-haired old man at the edge of the spiritual field that was covered by trees and rocks. He was looking at them with a smile on his face. He chuckled and kept drinking. His expression didn't change. He said, "However, although Shiji Su's talent is outstanding, she is also unusually diligent in her daily cultivation. It can even be considered as harsh. Let's not talk about other things. After advancing to the Jindan realm, she has to think of ways to eliminate the slight signs of instability in her aura. Who can understand the hardships in between?" Su Tong's expression darkened. He seemed to have thought of something and snorted coldly. Lu Chen sighed and said, "Actually, speaking of this, I think you should have an idea in your heart. The reason why Shiji Su is so diligent in her cultivation is actually because of the strict teachings of her master, Masato Kihara. She is meticulous and strives for perfection. That's why she has today's achievements. If you disturb her now, you will be violating Masato Kihara's order for her to meditate and cultivate. You can't guarantee that she will be reprimanded and punished later. How can you bear to do that?" Su Tong's expression changed. He suddenly broke out into curses. He said angrily, "That old man Mu Yuan. He's old and frivolous. He's so daring in his lust that he keeps surrounding my sister June all day long." In the distance, the gray-haired old man's body trembled. He spat out a mouthful of wine that was in his mouth. Outside the Immortal's cave, Lu Chen was also stunned. He waved his hands twice as if he wanted to stop Su Tong from continuing to speak. Unexpectedly, Su Tong, who was in a fit of anger, ignored him and continued to curse loudly. "Everyone in Kunwu City knows that my sister June has been gifted since she was a child. She was born with an immortal omen and was destined to become a person with great achievements in the future. At that time, many perfected sovereigns and spiritual masters in the Kunlun party took a fancy to our sister June. It was this shameless old man who was shameless and acted crafty. He secretly pretended to be a pitiful and lonely old man and begged Sister June while weeping bitterly. He made her soft-hearted for a moment and mistakenly entered this old man's tutelage." Lu Chen sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at Su Tong, who looked like a woman but had a much more explosive temper than most men. For a moment he had a whole new level of respect for him. He really felt that the saying "you can't judge a book by its cover" was simply a famous saying. At the same time he secretly glanced at the thatched hut. He saw that on the ridge of the field, the gray-haired old man was holding a wine urn. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. The light around him was faintly distorted, and there was actually the power of thunder and lightning. Lu Chen calmly took 2 steps back, distancing himself from Su Tong, who was spitting saliva everywhere. Then he looked at him with a gaze full of respect, as if he was looking at a dead man. He coughed and laughed dryly. "This can't really be so exaggerated, right? I say, why don't you go back first and we'll talk about it another day?" Su Tong stared at the stone door of the Immortal's cave in front of him. A trace of grief and indignation suddenly flashed across his face. After a moment, 2 lines of tears flowed from his eyes. Lu Chen was speechless as he watched from the side. When he was about to ask, he suddenly saw Su Tong throw himself in front of the door. He slapped the stone door and cried, Sister June, it's all because the men of the Su family are incompetent. If any of the men of the Su family had a promising future, how could they let you suffer such pain and suffering? If you weren't in Taiji but in Kuanji, how could your achievements be limited to a mere Jindan? How could your status in the sect be limited to this? Sister June, we've let you down. We've harmed you. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and looked at Su Tong, crying for a while. It seemed that Su Tong was completely immersed in his own world and could no longer pay attention to the outside world. On the other side, the gray-haired old man also looked stunned. He then shook his head vigorously as if he had seen a ghost. Lu Chen waited for a while, then walked up to Su Tong and pulled him up. He patiently persuaded him and finally managed to persuade him. Of course, this was mainly due to what he said. Su Qingjun had already sacrificed so much. It was better not to implicate and hurt her anymore. Just let her have a little peace in the Immortal's cave for a while. It could also be considered as a little heart-wrenching rest for this painful life. Hearing this, Su Tong burst into tears again. Only then did he walk away, looking back 3 times. Lu Chen sent this extremely eccentric young man away. After a while he slowly walked back. Looking at the empty Fian platform, He could not help but let out a long sigh. He felt that dealing with him was more tiring than assassinating people who were 10 times more powerful than him in the past. Lu Chen shook his head and slowly walked to the side of the straw hut. The gray-haired old man was standing on the ridge of the field, looking at him coldly with a gaze as sharp as a knife. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, "Senior, we are all reasonable people. Can you listen to what I have to say?" "No." The gray-haired old man shouted, and with a pa sound, the large wine urn under his ribs directly shattered into countless pieces, falling onto the soil of the field embankment with a hua-la-la sound. The Fian platform was instantly silent. Chapter 154. Lu Chen glanced at the overbearing gray-haired old man, and then glanced at the wine jar that had shattered into countless small pieces on the ground. After that he sighed and said, "Senior, you're being unreasonable." The gray-haired old man said angrily, "If you have something to say it quickly." Lu Chen immediately sped up and said, "First, you told me before that as long as I can get rid of that Su Tong, you will give me a reward and not a punishment. I can't just go back on my word. Second, those curses just now were all cursed by that stupid Su family boy. I didn't say anything. You can't vent your anger on me, right?" He looked at the gray-haired old man and said with a smile, "Senior, do you think what I said is right?" The gray-haired old man looked at him for a long time. The anger on his face suddenly eased, and there was a bit of admiration on his face. He said with a smile, "You kid, you are a bit interesting. From what you said, it seems like you have already guessed my identity." Lu Chen said, "Yes, I guessed a little before, but I didn't dare to confirm it, but it should be more or less right now." As he said this, he bowed and said seriously, "I pay my respects to Masato Kihara." Masato Kihara was Su Qingjuan's Shizuan. He was also a Yuanying Jinren with extremely high cultivation in the Kunlun party. At the same time he had another more sensitive identity, that was the leader of the Cheji branch of the Kunlun party. His position in the Kunlun party was extremely high. The gray-haired old man clapped his hands and said, "Interesting. Tell me, how did you know my identity?" Lu Chen said with a respectful expression, "Senior is fond of fine wine. This disciple has heard rumors before." The gray-haired old man nodded but then said, "But just based on this, I'm afraid it's not justifiable." Lu Chen said, "There is another matter here and now. Su Qingjun Shiji Su is now one of the most outstanding geniuses in the sect. Everyone in the sect knows how much you value her. This is an important moment of cultivation. Logically speaking, the other spiritual masters should avoid arousing suspicion and shouldn't appear here. Only you, Senior, can avoid suspicion. Comparing the two, I think Senpai is most likely Masato Kihara." The gray-haired old man stared at Lu Chen for a moment, before he finally nodded his head and said, "Well said. Such quick thinking. It's a pity that you don't have a good aptitude and can only be a service disciple." "What a pity." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's all natural. There's nothing we can do about it." The eccentric Yuanying Jinren, who was said to have shouldered all the dangers by himself, did not seem to have any unreasonable actions. He turned around and flicked his sleeve, and the broken pieces of the wine urns on the ground flew up and gathered into a pile. He sat down again on the ridge of the field and beckoned to Lu Chen, saying, "Come and sit." Lu Chen walked over and sat down beside him. Masato Kihara looked at him. The admiration in her eyes increased, but there was even more regret. Of course, this kind of gaze and emotion only flashed past. He smiled and said, "When I was angry just now, why didn't you show any fear? How did you see that I'm not angry?" Lu Chen paused, then pointed to the pile of broken pieces and said, "That wine urn is broken, but the wine inside did not spill out. You crushed it after drinking all the wine, right?" Masato Kihara laughed and nodded repeatedly. "June girl really has good taste. She actually chose such a quick-witted person like you to come over." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Senior, you flatter me. You should stay here for a long time. If there's anything, help to fend off those Su family people so that June girl can also relax. Otherwise, it will be too hard for her to be troubled by these trivial matters all day long." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, then said, "Thank you, Senior, for your kind intentions, but this matter will most likely need to be decided by Shiji Su herself. After all, Flying Goose Terrace is her place of quiet cultivation. If she herself does not like outsiders here, then no one can do anything about it." Masato Kihara nodded slowly. Although he was the Shizuan, it seemed that he really doted on his talented disciple, Su Qingjun. He would not casually come over and tell her what to do. Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, with your power as a Jinren, it won't take much effort to drive away those strange disciples of the Su family. Why do you need to go through so much trouble? Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and snorted coldly, nonsense. How can I not know about this matter? But isn't this because I have misgivings? June girl has a kind heart. She has always felt that she is born of the Su family and has received the full support of the Su family. So, she has always wanted to take care of that big family. So all these years, those good-for-nothing fellows have all pestered her for countless trivial matters, big and small. Lu Qin pondered for a moment and said, although this is reasonable, but in this disciple's opinion, it is necessary to be more respectful and filial to the elders who are valued by the family. As for the many troublesome youngsters below, it is not a problem to help out when there is an emergency. But if there is an excessive request, it is also possible to decline. Masato Kihara slapped his thigh and said loudly, isn't this the reason? Unfortunately, I have spoken to June girl a few times. She has verbally agreed, but when she cries and begs those good-for-nothings in the family, her heart has repeatedly softened. I also can't do anything about her. Lu Qin smiled and didn't answer. The latter part of the conversation was indeed not easy to answer. Masato Kihara could say this, but he couldn't. Moreover, looking at Masato Kihara's appearance, his heart ached for Su Qingjun. Perhaps it was sincere, but he didn't care about those Su family's children because of Su Qingjun. Taiji was in such an awkward and declining situation, and the Su family was second to none in Kunwu City. Because of Su Qingjun, he would naturally stand on Taiji's side. He could also be regarded as Taiji's financial backer. Although Masato Kihara's cultivation was 100 times higher than those good-for-nothings in the Su family, this face wasn't that easy to overturn. People often said that cultivators were like immortals, as if those who succeeded in cultivation were living the life of immortals. In fact, how could it be so easy and beautiful? There were always many helplessness and many fetters that couldn't be removed. No matter how big the world was, there was no exception. For a while Masato Kihara and Lu Qin didn't speak. The spiritual field was quiet. The mountain breeze blew gently. Looking from behind, the two of them, one old and one young, sat side by side on the ridge of the field. They looked very harmonious, and it was impossible to see that there was actually a world of difference in status between the two. After sitting for a while, Masato Kihara suddenly shook her head and sighed softly. She stood up and patted her buttocks, saying, forget it. I don't care about these dog skin and stove matters anymore. Go and call Qingjun out. I'll see her and give her a few words of advice before I leave. Lu Qin was startled and looked at Masato Kihara in astonishment. After waiting for a moment, Masato Kihara suddenly found that Lu Qin was still standing in place. She couldn't help but frown, saying, why aren't you going? For a moment, Lu Qin only felt a headache. If those people from the Su family ran over to pester Su Qingjun, he could still block them. But this person in front of him was Su Qingjun's master and the famous Yuanying spiritual master. How could he block her? After a moment of daze, Lu Qin smiled bitterly, saying, this? Senior sister Qingjun, she's meditating. Nonsense. As expected, Masato Kihara scolded back without thinking. Looking at him with a contemptuous expression, she said, I'm her master. How can I not know her situation? These words can only deceive the Su family's inexperienced trash. It's just eating some eagle fruit, why meditate? Just eat and sleep every day. When the time comes, just take the fruit and swallow it. There's no need for so many things. Go and call her out. Lu Qin smiled awkwardly, groaning inwardly. In this instant, thousands of ideas flashed through his mind, but none of them could solve the current predicament and send the old man away. He had no choice but to turn around and slowly walk toward the cave residence's stone door. He shook his head inwardly and smiled wryly as he thought, Su Qingjun, you're just unlucky. Who knew that even your master would come looking for trouble with you today? This is really unstoppable. Behind him, Masato Kihara was a little anxious. Frowning, she said, hey kid, weren't you so smart and capable just now? Why are you walking so slowly? Is something wrong? Lu Qin was startled. These Yuanying geezers were all as cunning as ghosts, able to sense the slightest thing wrong. He didn't dare to delay any longer, but he still couldn't think of a solution as he walked to the cave residence's door. Standing in front of the stone door, he subconsciously reached into his bosom. The yellow stone talisman was still lying there quietly. However, Lu Qin quickly put his hand down and coughed. Imitating the Su family disciples, he began banging on the stone door with force, calling out in a clear voice, Shijisu, open the door, your master is here." Unsurprisingly, the stone door stood tall and unresponsive. Luchin looked back and saw that Masato Kihara was also walking over with a frown. He coughed once and smiled at Masato Kihara. Then, pa, he continuously banged on the stone door. The movement was not small and the sound was very loud, but the stone door did not open. After a while, Luchin somewhat helplessly turned his head to look at Masato Kihara and said, "Senior, you see, perhaps Shijisu is really meditating at the moment. Why don't we not disturb her?" "Meditating my ass." Spiritual Master Muyuan seemed to speak very naturally in front of an insignificant servant disciple like Luchin. He casually scolded him, but then a suspicious look appeared on his face. He looked at the stone door and muttered to himself in a low voice, "But, could it be that this girl's old habit is acting up and she's sleeping in again?" "Sleep in what?" Luchin didn't hear clearly and asked, "What did you say, who likes to sleep?" "Nothing like that," Masato Kihara flatly said. Then his eyes turned and he waved his hand saying, "Get out of the way, I'll go in and take a look myself." "Senior, this isn't too good, right?" Chapter 155. Masato Kihara rolled his eyes and said, "What's not very good? This old man is her Shifu. I'm concerned about her going in to take a look. What's there to be surprised about?" Luchin sternly said, "Senior, although your seniority is high and your cultivation is high, but no matter what, the one living here is an unmarried young lady. If you suddenly barge in like this, in case..." He did not continue, only looked at Masato Kihara with a meaningful look. Masato Kihara angrily said, "In case what? You tell this old man clearly." Luchin said, "In case after you go in you see something you shouldn't see, to say something disrespectful. Shijisu lives alone in the cave, usually she wears, it's normal for her to wear something simple, but if you see it like this I'm afraid it's not good for both you and her." Masato Kihara was furious, said, "Stinky brat, you dare to talk to me like this?" Luchin coughed and said, "Senior, both of us are reasonable people, although your cultivation is 100 times higher than mine, but the reason is indeed so." After saying that he suddenly lowered his voice, leaned close to Masato Kihara and said in a low voice, "Don't forget, just now that Su family's boy Su Tong said those shameful words, every word hit the heart. People like us who understand naturally snorted and did not believe it, but in case you go in, some words won't be clear." Masato Kihara was startled, subconsciously took a step back and said, "That's right?" Luchin spread out his hands and said, "Isn't that so?" The more Masato Kihara thought, the more he felt it was reasonable, nodded repeatedly and said, that's right, you're right, this old man almost made a big mistake." After saying that he looked at Luchin, his eyes revealed a bit of joy and said, "Little guy is not bad, you would rather contradict this old man and still want to explain the reason, you really have strength of character." Luchin spat in his heart, thought, "Who wants this bullshit strength of character? If I can leave, this old man would have left long ago." But on the surface he still laughed dryly and took a step back, thinking that since it has come to this old man should leave first no matter what. Who knew that although Masato Kihara seemed to have dispelled the idea of breaking into the cave, he had no intention of leaving Fian platform. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, he suddenly frowned as if he had thought of something. Luchin looked at his expression, his heart thumped again. Facing such a nascent soul realm old man was not the same as dealing with the trash disciples of the Su family. It was really hard as hell. As expected, Master Muyuan thought for a moment, then looked at Luchin and said, "That's not right." Luchin smiled bitterly and said, "What is not right?" Masato Kihara said, "You have been knocking on the stone door of this cave for half a day, June girl did not open the door and come out. It's fine if it's like this on a normal day, but if the eagle fruit suddenly ripens and you want to call her, but she can't hear you, what should we do?" Luchin was speechless. Masato Kihara looked at him, his eyes revealing some suspicion and said, "With June girl's intelligence she would not have overlooked this. She must have given you something to contact her at any time, right?" Luchin looked at Masato Kihara also stared at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Luchin suddenly slapped his forehead, shouted loudly and sighed, "AI, look at my memory, Shijisu really gave me a burning heart talisman. A pity that my skills are low and I have never used it before, I actually forgot about it." "Forgot?" Masato Kihara looked at him with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Luchin sternly said, "I forgot." Saying so, he took out a yellow stone talisman from his bosom and handed it to Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara took the yellow stone talisman and looked at it, weighing it in his palm a few times, then he was not in a hurry to use it. Instead he raised his head and looked at Lu Qin again, suddenly smiled and said, "Brat, luckily you were born with a bad innate talent, only one pillar of the 5 elements divine plate, you can only be an odd-job disciple. Otherwise, with your intelligence, wit and cunning as a ghost, if you really had the apex talent of the 4 or 5 pillars, and were properly trained since young, I really don't know who in this world could be your opponent." Lu Qin smiled and said, "Senior, you must be joking." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything more. 2 of his fingers held the yellow stone talisman and gently fiddled with it. He didn't see how he cast a spell, but suddenly a flame rose from the stone talisman, swaying and burning. The flame was not big and the temperature was not high, but it looked very bright. It only flickered for a moment, then quickly dimmed. Masato Kihara looked at Lu Qin. Lu Qin said, "Looks like this burning heart talisman is not broken really good." Masato Kihara clicked his tongue and said, "Now I feel that you should be hiding something from me." Lu Qin resolutely shook his head and said, "There is no such thing." Masato Kihara snorted and did not say anything. The 2 of them stood in front of the stone door and waited for a while, but the stone door still did not move, there was no sign of it opening. Masato Kihara's expression gradually became ugly, and he turned to look at Lu Qin. He saw that Lu Qin was staring at the stone door, as if there was the most wonderful and strange thing in the world on the stone door attracting his attention, completely ignoring the wind and grass around him. Masato Kihara's face was cold and he said, "What is going on? If you don't explain clearly to me, be careful Before he finished speaking, they suddenly heard a rush of wind coming from above, mixed with a sharp whistling sound. It came from the dense ancient forest on the mountain wall in front of them. Lu Qin and spiritual master Muyuan looked up at the same time. A moment later, a slim figure flew out of the forest, drawing a graceful arc in the air. She spun lightly and landed like a lithe bird. She was devastatingly beautiful and her eyes were bright. It was none other than Su Qingjun. A fragrant wind blew like clouds falling, a few crystal-clear morning dew, like the wings of a bird flying freely in the forest, still lingering on the scarlet feathers on her shoulder. When the sun shone down, it reflected a dreamy and magnificent rainbow. "What is it? Is the eagle fruit ripe?" Just as they landed, Su Qingjun opened her mouth to ask Lu Qin. "Quickly take me there, don't delay." After saying this, she seemed to notice Masato Kihara standing at the side, and only then did she slightly apologetically say to Masato Kihara, "Shifu, you also came. But wait a moment, the eagle fruit is ripe, I am in a hurry to eat it first, I will come to greet you later." Masato Kihara opened her mouth, but didn't say anything, while Lu Qin stood at the side, not moving a single step as if he hadn't heard anything. Su Qingjun took 2 steps forward, then immediately turned her head back with some surprise, looking at Lu Qin saying, "Lu Qin, what is it? Didn't you say that you would only use the heart-burning talisman to call me back when the eagle fruit is ripe? Why haven't you left yet?" Lu Qin remained silent, only looking at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara was a bit embarrassed, coughing once and said, Qingjun, this eagle fruit is not ripe yet." Su Qingjun was startled for a moment, then a trace of anger flashed across her face and she angrily said to Lu Qin, "Hey Lu Qin, what is the matter with you? Such a big matter, are you treating it as a child's play? You have some guts, you dare to play with me? Let me tell you, believe it or not, Lu Qin clenched his teeth, a gloomy expression on his face, and only silently looked at Masato Kihara. Masato Kihara's old face turned red, and she hurriedly stepped forward to stop Su Qingjun, saying with a bitter smile, Hey, don't be anxious, Qingjun, don't scold little Lu, this matter is not his fault." Su Qingjun snorted, looking very dissatisfied, and glared at Lu Qin, saying angrily, "How is it not his fault? I clearly only gave him the heart-burning talisman, reminding him that he must wait for the eagle fruit to ripen before using it, but the result, I am so angry." Masato Kihara gave a hollow laugh, saying, "This heart-burning talisman? Well, actually, Master used it just now." Su Qingjun was startled, somewhat surprised, and turned to look at Masato Kihara, revealing a puzzled expression, saying, "Master, why did you use this heart-burning talisman? Besides, the eagle fruit hasn't ripened yet." Masato Kihara seemed to dote on this beautiful and peerless female disciple of hers, and usually spoke without any dignity as a master. At this time she could only say with a smile, "I came to see you, but the cave residence's stone door didn't open even after I knocked for a long time, So I forced Lu Chen to find you, so I took the heart-burning talisman, Master. Su Qingjun stamped her feet, and although she didn't say anything, the expression in her eyes when looking at Masato Kihara seemed to have said too much. Masato Kihara rolled her eyes and suddenly asked, "By the way, why aren't you in your cave residence so early in the morning? Where have you been?" Su Qingjun snorted and said, "I went to the top of the mountain to practice my swordsmanship. Didn't you teach me that the chi of the morning sun is the key to growth, and it can make up for the lack of the quiet moon?" Masato Kihara nodded and said, that's right. Saying this, she suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, I came here early in the morning to remind you that although you have to wait for the eagle fruit to ripen and can't leave, you still have to wake up early to practice your swordsmanship. Don't slack off." Standing at the side, Lu Chen immediately looked at this old man in a new light, and a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. He thought to himself, old people are really thick-skinned to be able to say such words so naturally. Su Qingjun glanced at her master, and there was a hint of suspicion in her eyes. She seemed to know Masato Kihara very well, and was very suspicious of what he had just said. Masato Kihara coughed and glared at Su Qingjun and said, "Stupid girl, what are you looking at? Your master is here to give you some advice. Don't be so rude in front of outsiders." Su Qingjun snorted and turned to stand aside. Lu Chen quickly said, You two take your time, I'm going to plant trees in the spiritual field." Saying this, he quickly walked away. Only now did Lu Chen let out a long sigh of relief and thought to himself, these 2,000 spiritual stones are really not easy to earn. However, when he walked to the edge of the spiritual field, he was suddenly startled as he thought of something. In the end, he muttered angrily, "This damn old man, where's the reward he promised me? He's pretending to be dead and not giving it to me." Chapter 156. Lying on the bed in the hut, Lu Chen used his hands as a pillow. His eyes were slightly closed as if he was resting his mind. What happened outside the hut seemed to have nothing to do with him. Noon had passed and it was quiet outside. The Fian platform seemed to have returned to its original state. At this moment there was a sudden knock on the door of the hut. Lu Chen walked over and opened the door. Seeing Su Qingjun standing outside, he smiled and said, "Are you done?" Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, my master has left." Lu Chen breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. Just as he was about to speak, he looked at his shabby hut and said, "This hut is small and shabby. It's too crowded for two people to stand. I won't invite you in." Su Qingjun glanced at his hut and was slightly startled. She said, It's not very good." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said, "This hut was built on your Fian platform. Don't you know?" Su Qingjun said, "I really didn't know. This hut was built by your Baichao Tang people. You see, I can't possibly build a hut for you to live in, right? Besides, I really don't know how to do this." Lu Chen nodded. He thought that if it was really Su Qingjun, this hut might be spacious and comfortable. It was just that the Baichao Tang people looked down on the Ajab disciples. The eagle fruit tree had to be taken care of, but of course no one cared about his hut. It was good enough to have a place to lie down. However, the two of them felt a little awkward talking to each other through a door. Thus, Lu Chen simply walked out of the thatched hut. The two of them stood on the ridge of the spirit field. A few cool breezes blew past and white clouds floated in the distance. It made them feel refreshed all of a sudden. "When did you come back?" Lu Chen asked Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun said, "Just now." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and said, "Then when you activated the heart-burning talisman just now, I arrived just in time. I took a detour to the back of the mountain and came down." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Did I tell you before that you're actually very good at lying when you're serious?" Su Qingjuan's fair cheeks blushed slightly and she said angrily, "Nonsense, there's no such thing." Lu Chen laughed and then told her about what happened in the morning. After listening, Su Qingjuan's face showed a trace of apology and said, "It's really been hard on you, but I really didn't misjudge you. You really are smarter than them." After a pause, Su Qingjun continued, "The spirit stones are in the Immortal's cave. I don't have them on me right now. I'll go back and get them for you later." Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand, and with a carefree expression he said, "You're too kind. How can I not believe you? You can get them whenever you want, there's no hurry." Su Qingjun looked at him and said, "You're really not in a hurry?" Lu Chen said seriously, "No, it's very urgent." Standing at the edge of the field, the mountain breeze blew past. For some reason, probably because the burden on her mind was gone, Su Qingjun had a rare smile on her face and looked relaxed. She looked at the eagle fruit trees and asked, "How are the eagle fruits?" Lu Chen said, "You're really lucky. There were no accidents and no fruits ripened. But I estimate that from tomorrow onwards, there will be eagle fruits that will ripen. I'll keep an eye on this place. Do you?" Su Qingjun smiled sweetly and said, "I know. I won't go anywhere other than Flying Goose Terrace." Lu Chen said, "Really?" Su Qingjun said, "Look at what you're saying. I've already said all that, why do you still look like you don't believe me?" "Because you said the same thing yesterday and then secretly ran away last night." Su Qingjun was speechless for a moment. After a while she smiled and said, "Wasn't it because I had urgent matters to attend to? Anyway, now that the urgent matter is over, I really won't leave." Why are you looking at me like that?" Lu Chen stared at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and after a while he nodded and said, "In the past, I always thought that you were always cold and arrogant. Who would have thought that after getting to know you a little, I would find that you're actually quite easygoing?" Su Qingjun was also slightly startled, and then she felt a little strange in her heart. Other than her own Su family members, this was actually the first time that she had spoken so much to a lowly odd-job disciple. She was also a little hesitant, but then she heard Lu Chen say from the side, "In that case, I have a few words that I don't really want to say, but I don't know if you want to hear them?" Seeing that he was speaking seriously, Su Qingjun's expression also became somewhat serious. After a moment of silence she said solemnly, "Please advise me." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "It's not really advice. I'm just an odd-job disciple and I don't dare to have that kind of thought. It's just that in my opinion you have too many relatives in your family. In the 20 days that you've eaten the eagle fruit, I think it's very difficult for you to guarantee that no one will come looking for you again, right?" Su Qingjun was silent. "If at that time they cry incessantly, saying that they've encountered a huge problem and only you can help solve it, what will you do?" Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face and said lightly, "At that time, will you go down the mountain or not? Are you sure there won't be any problems with this choice?" Su Qingjun was silent for a long time, then she smiled bitterly and said softly, "I don't know." Lu Chen looked at her for a while, then suddenly smiled and said, "You've been tired for the whole morning, go back to sleep." After saying this, Lu Chen turned around and walked back to the thatched hut. Seeing that somewhat shabby wooden door close in front of her, Su Qingjun slightly lowered her head. The excitement and joy from rushing back in time suddenly disappeared for some reason. She stared blankly at the thatched hut, then looked at the eagle fruit tree in the spirit field. After a while she silently turned around and walked towards the cave in the distance. The Fian Terrace was very quiet in the afternoon. In the blink of an eye, it was dusk and the afterglow of the setting sun shone down. Lu Chen suddenly saw a gap in the window next to him, and then a woman stood outside and said, "I have a very delicious spirit fruit here, do you want to eat it?" "Yes." Lu Chen jumped up. Under the setting sun, the Fian Terrace was covered with a layer of red coat. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun sat side by side on the ridge of the field, a little distance apart. There was a plate in the middle of the ground, on which there were 8 or 9 bright red spirit fruits like peaches, and there were 4 or 5 fruit pits on the ground next to them. Lu Chen was holding a spirit fruit in his hand and he was chewing it. Su Qingjun looked at him and the expression on her face changed from a little surprise to a little amusement, and then she really laughed and said, "You really don't have to be polite?" Lu Chen said, "Nonsense, I usually can't eat these spirit fruits, why would I let go of this opportunity? You're really interesting." "I'm a little different from others." "How is it different?" "As a servant disciple, you don't seem to have much respect for me, Jindan Friar, and you talk to me very naturally and easygoing, which is rare." "Well, I don't mean anything else, I think it's good this way." Lu Chen's hand paused for a moment and his eyes flickered and he said, "Is that true? Maybe I heard someone say that before." "Really? Who is it?" Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand saying, "A bald old guy, far worse than you." "Oh." Su Qingjun nodded, and then she seemed to hesitate for a moment and didn't continue to speak. But Lu Chen looked at her and then he gently threw away another fruit pit in his hand and then said with a smile, "I've eaten this spirit fruit, you can ask me anything you want." Su Qingjun glared at him and suddenly burst into laughter and then she sighed, "It's so easy to talk to a smart person like you." As she said that she sat up straight and said, "Well, I won't beat around the bush. What you said to me at the end of the day, I actually understand that it's a big problem but well, anyway, it's a bit difficult and I don't know what to do. Judging from what you said before, maybe you have a good idea?" Lu Chen clapped his hands and said, This matter actually depends on how you look at it. How so? Those relatives of yours came to bother you with all kinds of things for so long, is it really a matter of life and death? Su Qingjun was silent. Lu Chen said again, you said that people are different from each other, and the small things in our eyes may be a matter of life and death in the eyes of others. But I don't believe that you haven't thought that those things really can't be delayed, right? Delay it for a few days and you don't have to deal with it immediately, okay? Su Qingjuan's gaze swept into the distance, still not saying a word, but this silence seemed to have explained something. After a while, Su Qingjun nodded and said softly, what you said actually makes a lot of sense, but sometimes I still can't put down your pride? Lu Chen said lightly. Su Qingjun smiled bitterly. To be honest, it's also the first time I've seen a proud daughter of an aristocratic family like you. Lu Chen said, I always feel that the whole Su family has to be on my shoulders, and I have to solve everything by myself. When others come to beg you, you're shy and embarrassed to refuse them. Su Qingjun frowned with some distress, and after a while, she suddenly realized that the surroundings had quietened down. She raised her head in surprise and looked at Lu Chen and said, why don't you continue? Lu Chen sighed and said, I've already said it so directly, so seriously, and you're still not angry? Su Qingjun shook her head and said, what you said is the truth, what's there for me to be angry about? Lu Chen stared at her for a while, and the gaze in the depths of his eyes gradually became gentler, and then he nodded and said, all right. I have a way to help you. Chapter 157. Su Qingjuan's eyes lit up and she said, what method? Lu Chen glanced at her and said, you don't need to see those people. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and then she said angrily, how is that possible they? Halfway through her words she suddenly paused and looked thoughtfully at Lu Chen. She seemed to have thought of something and said, you mean you're going to? Lu Chen said straightforwardly, I'm going to stop them. You hide in the cave and pretend you don't know about these things. This. Su Qingjun was a little stunned for a moment. She looked a little tempted on the surface, but she seemed to be a little worried. Lu Chen looked on from the side and also felt a little emotional. He didn't expect that the genius girl of the Su family who was so valued by the outside world would have such a tangled temperament. One really couldn't judge a book by its cover. However, she valued her family so much. Wasn't this the kind of kinship that he had never had in his life? What kind of kinship was that? Lu Chen shook his head and said to Su Qingjun, think about it yourself. Anyway, I've told you what to do. The final decision is up to you. Su Qingjuan's expression changed. After a moment, she suddenly gritted her teeth and said, okay, I'll do as you say. Seeing that she had made up her mind so quickly, Lu Chen was a little surprised and said, you've thought it through? Su Qingjun nodded and said with a resolute expression, yes, this time I've thought it through. What you said just now is all right. No one has said it to me so clearly in the past, or maybe I'm clear in my heart, but I can't bring myself to say it. In short, I feel that this time, I still have to focus on my own cultivation and put aside the family matters for the time being. Lu Chen grunted and said, since you've made up your mind, then it's easy. But there are still some words that I have to say to you first. Su Qingjun said, say it. First, you cannot be soft-hearted. You know very well what your relatives are like. When the time comes when they cry and beg, you will pretend that you can't see or hear them. You will just stay in the cave and not come out. All right. Su Qingjun nodded heavily. It seemed that she had made up her mind this time. Lu Chen continued, secondly, your Su family is an aristocratic family, and the children of your family are all proud and arrogant. If they are stopped by an unknown odd-job disciple like me, they might get angry and want to teach me a lesson. At that time, if I use my power to bully others and act recklessly, I will naturally deserve to be beaten. But if I'm on the side of reason, will you support me? Su Qingjun was startled and said, if they really bullied you for no reason, of course I have to protect you. Lu Chen smiled and suddenly slapped his cheeks, saying, they hit my face, I can't and don't have the strength to fight back. Then after you come out, what will you do? Will you lightly scold them or will you hit them back? Lu Chen stared at Su Qingjun, his mouth lightly said words of criticism. Su Qingjun became silent again, but this time she kept looking at Lu Chen, her eyes suddenly became somewhat cold. Why do I suddenly feel that you seem to be trying to sow discord between me and my family? Su Qingjun said softly. We have only known each other for a short time. As the saying goes, strangers do not get close. Do you think I can do that? Lu Chen asked her in reply. Su Qingjun stood up and said, Then how can you ask me to do this for you? Lu Chen also slowly stood up and looked at the beautiful woman in front of him saying, Then why should I help you do this kind of strenuous and unrewarding thing? Am I crazy? Su Qingjun was stunned speechless. Under the setting sun, the shadows of the two of them were stretched very long on the ground. Su Qingjun looked at the slender figure and was in a trance for a moment. It seemed that she wanted to say something but she swallowed it back. You see, the principles in this world are all the same. If you can't do this, I can't help you. Lu Chen said calmly, I know that in the past you probably always thought that others should be happy to help you, regardless of the reward, regardless of the gains or losses, and you also take care of your family in the same way. But I am different. Lu Chen said in a very calm but firm tone, This kind of thing, I must make you make up your mind and clearly stand on my side, only then I dare to help you. I am just a small figure, the weakest and smallest odd-job disciple in Kunlun Mountain. Anyone can bully me, right? An ant also has an ant's way of living. Su Qingjuan's expression changed slightly as if she was a little shocked, but in the end she did not speak. Lu Chen did not say anything more to her, but turned around and walked back to the straw hut, at the same time saying, It's late, go back and rest. It's getting late. Go back and rest. I will call you tomorrow when the eagle fruit ripens. The moon rose and set, the stars changed and the quiet night passed quietly. A new day had begun. After walking out of the straw hut, Lu Chen faced the morning sun and stretched, then casually walked around the flying goose platform, before returning to the spiritual field and began to busy himself. In the middle of it, he looked at the cave abode once, only to see that the stone door was tightly shut, and there was no movement all morning. In response, he only smiled and did not say anything more, just buried his head in what he was doing. About an hour before noon, Lu Chen, who was preparing to leave the spiritual field to rest, suddenly smelled a strange fragrance. His body trembled slightly and he immediately looked up, then turned around twice in the spiritual field, and soon saw that on a certain fruit tree, an eagle fruit had ripened. Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice as if he was admiring it, but also as if he found it funny. Then he took out the yellow stone talisman from his bosom, and with a whoosh, the strange flame ignited. Then he turned his head to look at the stone door of the cave abode on the mountain wall. At first it was still quiet there. But soon, suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the stone door, breaking the silence. After a moment, a figure rushed out with a whoosh, like an arrow released from a bow, and swept to the side of the spiritual field. It was Su Qingjun. Was it you who ignited the heart-burning talisman? An eagle fruit has ripened? As soon as she stopped, she asked hurriedly. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then immediately pointed in the direction of the ripened eagle fruit behind him. Su Qingjuan's body floated up, and easily jumped into the air, plucking the fruit. It was only the size of a thumb and she swallowed it in one gulp. Then, after letting out a sigh of relief, she directly sat cross-legged on the ridge of the field. It seemed that she was adjusting her breathing and digesting this rare fruit. And Lu Chen looked at her with interest. At this moment, Su Qingjun could not say that her clothes were disheveled, but it was also not her usual attire. Her originally meticulous hair was still messy, and a few strands of beautiful hair hung down. Her clothes were mostly loose, and although she was not naked, it looked like a girl's bedroom pajamas. There was no makeup on her face, and there was a faint trace of tiredness in her expression. As Lu Chen looked at her, a strange expression suddenly appeared on his face. After about the time to drink a cup of tea, probably digesting the eagle fruit, Su Qingjun let out a long breath, stood up and said, Sure enough, the fresh eagle fruit is different from the others. It is indeed very useful for me to stabilize my Jindan realm. Of course, no matter what, your master Masato Kihara is an experienced and knowledgeable Yuanying Jinren, she would not lie. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Thank you. Saying this, she intended to turn around and walk back to the cave residence. But at this time she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask behind her, Shiji Su, if I may be so bold as to ask. Looking at your attire, could it be that you were still sleeping? But at this time she suddenly heard Lu Chen suddenly ask, Nonsense, there is no such thing. Su Qingjuan's body stiffened, and a trace of embarrassment flashed across her face. She said, Nonsense, there's no such thing. After that, she lowered her head and walked away quickly. Lu Chen looked at her back thoughtfully. Cultivators were also humans. Naturally, they would also sleep and rest. There was nothing strange about this in itself. But the problem was that Su Qingjun was famous for being obsessed with cultivation and diligent. According to the rumors in the Kunlun party, she was a model disciple who would wake up early in the morning and train hard at night. The general meaning of the rumors was to warn everyone that this genius was extremely diligent and had a bit of talent to achieve such achievements. Then Lu Chen saw that the sun was already high up in the sky, and this beautiful woman was actually sleeping in his cave residence alone. This matter was too shocking, too unexpected. Something wasn't right. Lu Chen couldn't quite believe his own eyes. But very quickly he thought of the details of those things that happened earlier. Early in the morning there was no response for a long time. Maybe she wasn't cultivating and didn't hear me. Maybe she was sleeping and didn't hear me. After such a long time, she must have spent quite a lot of time to dress up and dress herself up to her usual meticulous appearance. Everyone, even the Su family members whom she valued the most, are not allowed to enter her cave residence. They can only talk outside. In her cave residence, only she can enter alone. What's so strange about it? Could it be that she had just woken up and her bed is messy and afraid of being seen by others? Lu Chen was also in a daze. Suddenly he gave a wry smile. He wondered if recently he had thought too much about tracking down the evil sect spies. His mind was not very clear. Everything he saw would lead to a bunch of things. Forget it, I don't care if she sleeps in or not. It has nothing to do with me. Lu Chen shook his head and walked towards the hut. In the distance, Su Qingjun had already walked into the cave residence. The stone door behind her closed with a rumble, once again sealing the cave residence. This was the only time the two of them met each other, and also the only time they had a conversation. Time passed by in the blink of an eye. Soon, it was the 4th day of Lu Chen's stay at the Flying Goose platform. This morning the eagle fruits had not ripened yet. But when the sun had just risen in the sky, 3 people suddenly came to the entrance of the cave residence. It was Sumo, Su Qian and Su Wen. They had bloody noses and swollen faces. They looked to be in a sorry state. They ran to the stone door of the cave residence and knelt down with a plop. Then they shouted, Sister June, you have to help us. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.